Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm thrilled to welcome back Deb Fillman from the Reason We Learn podcast on the YouTube. Her first presentation was an absolute gem, packed with value and high-opening insights, and she's here for round two with her sharp, no-nonsense take on education. So, Deb, I'm so glad you're back, and let's dive in.
Okay,
So,
thank you so much for having me. Excuse me for a moment. I'm having a little issue with my mic because there's something on it and it's in my frame of vision and distracting me. Sorry.
no problem.
So I really appreciate you having me back. Sorry for the long delay in getting back to you. I have wanted to speak to your audience again for a while,
Thank you
so
very much.
appreciate it.
Yeah. So I would like to to begin with a question, which is like framing the conversation. And the big question I think is like, should our children be educated by our parents, or should it be by the state? And what are the implications of each one of those different approaches? I, of course, submit that children should be beside their children and away from this Leviathan, the beast, which is like basically social engineering and taking our children as hostages to become something as a tool very useful for their agendas. So I would love to hear your opinion about it, and then maybe you can tell us what are the different methods and tactics that they are using.
Sure. I want to preface this by saying I think it's important for parents to remember that even if you were to genuinely believe that the state truly has your best interests at heart. Let's give them their argument that they have your best interest at heart, that you've perhaps even elected them, through voting in their democratic country, whatever, and you've elected them. And so therefore they are your representatives and they are making choices on your behalf just to make things easier. Even if you believe that wholeheartedly, without any reservation, I still would put it to parents, can they possibly know? Is it even possible for the most well intentioned group of people who, again, are just people? They're flawed human beings like everybody, right? And they are also strangers to you. Unless you personally know and are friends with every single minister in the government and every single person, they're strangers. Even your next door neighbor, if you're not best buddies, is technically a stranger.
Mhm.
So can they possibly know or have the best interests of every child in their mind when they make decisions that must, by definition, also in an equal rights society, apply equally to everyone? You would have to accept the premise that all children are literally equal, which we know isn't true. They ought to be equal under your law. In other words, we shouldn't be discriminating and treating anybody differently arbitrarily, but can they literally be educated equally? Can we design a system that will be effective? And I'm leaving principle out of it. I'm leaving the compulsion to be there and the compulsion to pay for it completely out of the equation and just saying, from a pragmatic approach, is it even possible? Now bring in the principle of the matter. Do you think that in a democratic, which means political system, it would be possible to elect these perfect people, to find people who run for office, sit in office, run for re-election, or are appointed by those who do, who have those pure end user intent, like that's their best, as opposed to maybe their best, their party's best, their boss's best, somebody else's best in mind when they design this standardized system. So I wanted to lay that out there as the groundwork, because I know there are people who are hesitant when they hear things like they want you to be compliant, and that they hear the word they and they recoil, like, oh, conspiracy theory. Or they hear arguments about the behavioral tactics of sort of social engineering and so on, and think, oh, truly you are a little paranoid, don't you think? And what I just want to say is to your parent, to those parents, I understand why you would like to believe that people have best intentions. I get it. It's a human thing. But I wanted you to think about, even if they do. Let's say they did. If that were possible, could they do it? And it well enough for your babies. And I use the word babies intentionally because every person you see walking around who has not turned out so well, including people who are currently attacking your country, every human being was someone's baby once. And then everything that happened to them after that is not an excuse, but it is a big part of the reason they turn out the way they do. We look at the UNRWA schools as an example, and
Mhm.
even the other, educational materials, propaganda materials, let's say in Gaza. And then we see small children carrying guns and talking about wanting to kill people. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen solely because, the parents are saying it. That is an entire society organized around our government knows what's best for our children. It's okay for them to teach them this. Go ahead, take my kid and turn my kid into what they're capable of turning him into that. And guess what they say that's the same as what our governments are saying in our schools, where we're not attacking people. They're saying, we want our children to be good. We want to raise the children, train the children, teach the children, educate the children so they will be good people. Now, an Israeli's definition of a good person, or even an individual Israeli's definition of a good person, and the Gazans' definition of a good person, are they anywhere in the same universe?
No,
Not even close.
completely different.
Which is why we should all, whether we have children or not, be extremely suspicious of any one person, never mind a whole group of them, especially with police power, who tell us that they know what's best and they have the answer, the research, the whatever you want, that empowers them or entitles them to define what good is for your child and then to train your child to be that version of good. And everything we're going to talk about today hinges on or is excused by that. When it comes right down to it, if you complain, if you ask questions, if you want more information, can I see the curriculum? It's all going to come down to one fundamental question. Don't you want your child to be good?
So they're taking advantage of the moral high ground,
Yes.
our empathy, and our like eagerness for us to be part of society in a productive way and to take
Yes.
care of others. Right, the altruistic nature of people.
Yes. It's not even so much altruistic. It's a survival. It's a built-in survival mechanism. We are essentially social creatures going all the way back to cave dwelling times, where we evolved to be able to and comfortable with being interdependent with other humans, because we realize those who do that will survive more readily than those who are complete islands and live alone. So we are social creatures similar to all primates. But being a social creature doesn't necessarily mean, especially if you are evolved, you're a human being with a prefrontal cortex. Remember, we are not literally apes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you must or even should conform to the group. It just means that you probably will appreciate certain skills, talents, whatever that other people have, and build groups, networks, societies that will enhance your ability to survive. But what we humans have that our fellow primates don't have is that prefrontal cortex, where we get to choose. They don't get to choose. They're born into a troop. They're born into a group in some mountain in Africa or wherever they live. Okay. And that's their group. And if they get cast out, they won't readily be accepted by another. You've probably seen the, National Geographic type stuff. There's a little baby gorilla that's abandoned or something, and maybe someone decides to take it on, but more often than not, no. So in our society, because we're human, we can choose. We can be in one group, or we can be born into a certain situation and say, no, I'm going to use my thinking mind and decide this is not healthy. Imagine there were a child in Gaza who had enough space alone without being bombarded by all this to actually think for him or herself and say, wait a minute, this is a death wish. This is crazy. This is putting death above life. I don't want to do this. I don't want to live like this. They could conceivably, if they were not literally imprisoned by their own government, they could conceivably say, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this. Or just in their own mind say, I'm not participating. I'm not doing this. I'm going to find every which loophole, even if it means I get in trouble and die, because I won't let someone else control me. We humans have that ability. Animals don't. We're also the only human that can make up its mind to hurt other humans for fun.
Yeah.
The other animals don't do that. They will hurt for food. They'll hurt for survival. They'll hurt because they're diseased and they're scared, but they won't just go out and kill for the sheer fun of it. And they don't make up excuses to make it good. And this is something that humans do. And so whenever you hear somebody in a position of power, even in a peaceful democracy, seemingly whatever, tell you that they need to educate your children, or they have the authority to decide that, because don't you want a peaceful world? Don't, UNESCO says this all the time. We want a more peaceful world. We want more peaceful people. Well, what does that mean? No one ever asks them. Define more peaceful people. What does that mean?
It
Don't
should
defend
be.
yourself. They're telling Israel, don't defend yourself. Is that your definition of peace? Because that sounds like a never-ending war. If people can if I can attack someone scot-free, and because somebody else says don't fight back, that doesn't sound like a very peaceful world to me. That sounds like survival of the biggest and strongest and meanest and most evil. Right?
Actually, I think that the introduction of violence into every interaction in society under the umbrella of the government is what created this mess that we are all in. It has to be a
100%.
voluntary interaction. People have to choose
Yes,
people who have shared values, common
that's right.
ground, and yeah, and
That's why all education, in my view, should be private. And that it does not necessarily mean homeschooling in your house. Mom and dad are the teachers, although I do believe mom and dad are the first, primary educators of their children, and should be. They should decide. They should decide who the other adults are around their children all day. So if you do decide to send your child to a school environment, you should have the final say in choosing what that environment is. And you may go with this sort of group environment, a school environment where they decide a curriculum, whatever. But if if they show everything and say, here it is, this is everything it is, does this align with your values? And you say, yes, this is what I would do if I could do it. It's like when you go out to eat and you want to go to a restaurant that makes the food as if you would make it if you had the time and the wherewithal to cook it. Same thing. You don't want to go to fast food. We're like, what's in this? And I don't understand the ingredient label. And I feel kind of sick after I eat it. And oh dear. So that's what the government schools essentially are, sort of like fast food, where it's food. It looks like food. It kind of tastes good, but underneath it all, it's not very nourishing. Same thing. And so I don't want anyone to hear me saying you all have to quit your jobs and stay home and stand over your children for the next 13 or 14 years and teach them everything. Well, no, obviously, I think that's a wonderful thing to do, and I would applaud you if you did it. But if you simply can't, and there are plenty of people for a host of solid reasons who don't feel that they can do that, I still would encourage you to, fight for your right to privately decide and to have all of these options privatized so they are truly competing, they're truly in a free market, and they will live and die by their success and failure by the parents' standards, not by the government's standards.
absolutely. Actually, I think that this is another consequence of the system, the manipulation of the system, the inability of one of the parents to stay home and
Of
take care of
course.
the children, because the purchasing power of the money and all the manipulation, they are just making it impossible for us and breaking the family in the process.
There are those who say that feminism was a bit of an invention of the industrialists for that purpose.
Of course,
In other words, they funded it, they promoted it because that you get double the taxpayers, you get double the workers, you break up the nuclear family, which, as you point out, breaking up the nuclear family and making the family no longer the center of moral and ethical education is the first step. One of the most, every totalitarian regime that ever was mandated that women go to work and the state raise the children. And that is why we can't let children go back to that, honor thy mother and father. They have to, the state is their mother and father now.
yes,
And
absolutely.
so what, even in our democratic societies, this is what they have done. And so we've seen over the past 100 years, the family recede in the child's mind by the time they're 7 or 8 years old at the eldest. If they go to school at 3 or 4, it happens much sooner. They go to school at 6 or 7, and that's about where it cuts off. And suddenly it's, no, mommy, you're not the teacher. You don't know. My teacher said this, my teacher said that. It's also in the structure of most schools, the way they're structured with bells and desks and titles and, this very regimented schedule, it creates the impression for the child that they're very perceptive authority.
Yeah.
Bad things are going to, and plus there are rules, literal rules. Bad things will happen to me or my family if I don't toe the line. I'll get in trouble. That's implied. Even in today's society where we have restorative justice, which I can talk about later, where children are barely disciplined, they still learn the boundaries of like what I can get away with, what I can't get away with, that aren't the family's boundaries anymore. They're the state's boundaries. And in many cases, the state's boundaries will be more lenient than they would be in your home. In your home, you might never tolerate your child sassing you, talking back, calling you names, throwing things around the room or whatever. Some of the things that happen in school, you would never make an excuse for that. That would be a serious problem. Now, how you would discipline is up to you, but you wouldn't just go, okay, here's a bag of chips. Let's have a chat about it. So even if they go the leniency route, they're interfering with your home life because you no longer can discipline your child. At school, you can do it. Well, where are you going to go at home when at school I can do all these 20 things? So it's either they become the authority on what is good and right and proper and okay, right down to saying explicitly sometimes your parents are wrong. Now that's the most extreme, but it happens. It certainly happens in the United States. Can't speak for Israel, but it definitely happens here every single day. Sometimes they're very explicit. Your parents are wrong. Your parents are, they're old-fashioned. And sometimes it's just implied in everything they teach. Well, that was then and this is now and now is better. And
Yeah.
then could be the year 2000 or even 2020, pre-COVID. They could go back 5 minutes and say that was then, this is now. They changed their mind plenty. So
Yeah.
they want to keep them that way.
Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about the destruction of the emotional bond between, for example, the mother and the child when the child is developing this bond to the state and loyalty to the state. And of course, the family is like a factory for the creation of individuals. And this is the place where you learn your morality and you
Yes.
are connected to reality, actually. So what do you see as the implications of this destruction, the family bond destruction, and what will it lead to eventually? What does it
Sure.
lead to?
So the biggest risk is that the child at a young age where the morality and philosophy of life is developing, their telos, like
Yeah,
it's developing, they are pulled away from the people who truly do love them, like at the cellular level, we would hope. I mean, obviously they're abusive families, but I'm saying in general, who have a personal, a physical, a legal stake in their health, their happiness, their growth into a self-sufficient individual. So when the school starts to reframe things in terms of group identities, which is how they do it. So instead of being so-and-so daughter or son of so-and-so, a family of people who, worship this God, have these traditions, et cetera. So we're in this family unit. Instead of being this individual, you are now a member of a much larger group where you can't possibly know everyone, right? You can't possibly, they couldn't, if they wanted to, all love you, and nor should they. And yet that becomes more important. That's what you talk about all day long. So suddenly it's your race, your religion, your national or ethnic identity, your gender. Or now, of course, they've introduced another complexity, some gender identity, which isn't even real. By the way, race isn't real either. But all of these inventions that the state is leaning into. We spent decades being told, let's go away from this. We're all supposed to meld together and be, accept each other, not see race, and just, you're a human being, you're a human individual. And suddenly we're going almost backwards in time to a form of tribalism that is not as intimate as original tribalism, where it's literally like this tribe is around this campfire, but it's this big, enormous multinational tribe based on arbitrary things that have nothing to do with your thoughts, your anything you could come up with on your own. And then what they do is they define what the parameters and the characteristics of those tribes are. So they'll tell you, what it is to be a good fill in the blank. If you're really a woman, you'll believe these things. If you're really a man, you'll follow this. If you're really Black, you'll do this. If you're really gay, you'll think this. And they come up with an almost orthodoxy. It's like a religion. They come up with an orthodoxy of what it means to be a good, and in this case, globalist, global citizen. That's the goal, that we should all be members of some giant thing called the global community, and that we're part of these identity groups within this global community, so that you get fooled into believing that you have more in common with, or more affinity for people who live on the other side of the planet, whose lives you don't understand, you never will, you're not part of their lives, etc. But you're going to stand up. You might even kill for them. You might even die for them, but not for your family. Your family starts to become this small, provincial, colloquial, like, oh, that's so primitive, but in a bad way. And they think they're more enlightened. And they tell the child, your parents don't understand. This is this more future facing enlightened thing, when in fact it's quite the opposite. It's taking all the worst elements of the original tribalism, where you really don't have as many options to leave. You have the thought that you could leave, but leaving might get you into trouble, like just like with the animals, where you could die or whatever because you don't have somebody to help feed you. So you'll still get in trouble, but you have that, but you have this forward thinking, notion that people on the other side of the planet exist, because we have technology that tells us they do. In the olden days, the tribes, they didn't know that there was another tribe on the other side of the mountain that was different. Unless they went there, they had no idea. So we know, and yet rather than using that knowledge to say, wow, 7 billion individual human beings, that becomes too overwhelming. And they're saying, no, group yourself by this. And then everywhere you go, those are your people. And now you're part of this global Black community or global something. It's perfectly ridiculous. It eliminates culture, actual organic culture that has developed over thousands of years with good reason. The reason we call it culture is it lasted because it aided in our survival, usually.
Yeah.
Even the cultures we look at and say, that's a terrible, murderous, horrible culture, they're still here. They're still here. They're still reproducing, like, excuse the expression, rabbits. So, we can hate it all we want. But the fact of the matter is, as barbaric as it is, it's surviving. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge. And part of its survival is a function of our refusal to put our survival ahead of this so-called I want to be a good person stuff. And then, instead of realizing they can coexist. So what they do is they separate the child from the familial bonds to pull them in, under the skirt of the global community, and make it so that is who I trust now. I trust big narratives, big messages. And who delivers big narratives and big messages? Who delivers this dogma? It's always the state, or agents of the state, or partners of the state. Mm-hmm. So it could be a private, corporation. But if they're practicing corporate fascism, if they're like, sitting there with the government going, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, and doing this little thing, which is happening a lot in the United States. I don't know about where you are. Then it's still agents of the state. Yes. They're still playing kissy face with the state. So, and these are the guys with the guns, and these are, and the children have no idea, because they get them when they're at a stage of morality. If you go with Kohlberg's, definitions, they're getting them at a point where they really want to be good, and they see being a good person as the consequences of, like, how people treat them. So if somebody says you're good and pats them on the head, they think they're good. Yeah. They don't really go any farther than that. And if you keep the child in that state, you don't push them to evolve. And everything you're teaching them rewards them for that belief. They could end up being a 25-year-old who's stuck in that stage and says, I'm good because my peers said I'm good. I'm good because the teacher said I'm good, or I say these words and that means I'm good. The consequence, they like me, ergo I'm one of the good guys. And that is a very juvenile way to look at the world. Mature people have an inner compass. We have something inside of our heads where we've decided what our values are. And ordinarily those would come from a combination of our family, our experiences, our real life experiences, ours, not some made up ones in a school building. And then we would wrestle with it and we'd make a decision. What is my personal philosophy? What do I believe is true and real and good and so on? And who deserves my attention? Who doesn't? All of this. And we would make the decision ourselves, but they cut that off and say, we'll decide. But they do it so gradually, so subtly, so like completely for 8 hours a day that the child doesn't even know what's happening. They don't know what's happening. They genuinely believe what they think is right is right. So I'll give you an example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, there are two children's stories that are read to children at a very young age. One is called The Little Red Hen. This is in English anyway. And one is called Rainbow Fish. Have you heard of either of these stories?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
In The Little Red Hen, the premise is that the little red hen has some weed, or not weed. Wheat, not weed, Deb, not weed, wheat. She doesn't have weed. And she has some seeds. And she goes to a dog, a duck, and a cat that live nearby. And she says, who will help me plant the wheat? Not I, not I, not I. They go through this whole not I thing. At every stage of the planting, the hoeing, the growing, the harvesting, the grinding into flour, and then the making of the cake, she asks at every stage, who will help me? And they all say no. And they're all like lazing about, sleeping, wafter, not doing anything. And they say no. She's like, okay, I'll do it myself. Every time I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself. So she does. And then she bakes this cake and the smell is wafting out and they smell the cake and they're like, oh, can I have some cake? And she said, I did this, I did this, I did this. She lists all the things she did. She said, so I'm going to eat the cake myself. And she gives them none of it. Now, this was the story I was raised on, to teach work ethic and to teach that you don't work, you don't eat, you don't help, you don't eat, you don't, if you don't participate in producing, you don't get. And of course, the moral after that, it showed them being all industrious and helping her and sweeping and cleaning and things. They learned their lesson. Like, I need to participate. I can't just lie around and take naps all day. Now, that's story A that I grew up on, Gen X and prior. And I believed it. That one, and also like the little engine that could, where it's loaded up with toys and it asks all these other engines for help. And they're like, nah, I'm not helping you climb the mountain to get to the little girls and boys. Blah, screw it. The train's like, I think I can. And it gets to the top of the mountain all by itself. I did it. So again, another one where it's like, I, the individual, am going to take care of this problem. Now, fast forward, come to, I think it was the early 90s. Story comes out, I believe, of Sweden, called Rainbow Fish. Beautiful pictures. This fish with scales, and each one is like glowing with different rainbow colors. It's beautiful. And it's swimming around the ocean. And these other sort of boring looking fish are like, that's not fair. You have a pretty, I'm oversimplifying, but you have pretty scales. Well, I don't have anything pretty and I want one. And the fish gives a scale. And all these fish are like, give me a scale, give me a scale. And the rainbow fish gives out all but one scale. And then they make it like, and now they're all friends. I hate this book. This book to me is so subversive. And this is one example of, and I bet parents are like, I have that book. I never thought of that. Why would you want your 3 or 4-year-old being taught this? And that quickly became Rainbow Fish. I started seeing parents when I had my kids at the park or playground or wherever, who would say, share your toys, share. You need to share. Sharing is good. Same at school. Share. Everybody has to share. No, that's not yours. That belongs to everybody. And they were taking children who are just at the beginning of their lives, trying to figure out, who am I in space and time? What is mine? What can I count on? What can I hold on to? And telling them, no, nothing at all. If you don't share, you're naughty. And I would go to the park with my daughter and she would wait her turn to go on the swing. Maybe 3 swings. She'd wait her turn. A kid gets off and then it's her turn. She'd get on the swing. She'd be there 5 minutes or so, not very long. Another parent would come along and say, don't you think your daughter's been on the swing long enough and she needs to share with the other children? And I would say, no. I think when she's good and ready, she waited for her turn. And when she's ready to get off the swing, she will get off the swing. Same with their pails and buckets and the sandbox and everything else. And I was persona non grata at the park because for some reason, all the other parents had bought into this. to be a good parent and raise a good person, I need to do it the sort of rainbow fish way, and the way that the nursery school says, and all things is like share and share alike. Everyone should share. And I'm just like, that's baby socialism. I'm not doing it. I'm not teaching my child that, because the other thing it does, there's this political aspect and economic aspect of what it does. But there's also, we're talking about telling children you don't have a right to boundaries. You don't
Mhm.
have a right to even the most basic thing of saying no. If you can't say no, you are not free. And I'm not talking about no to like you can't speed at 100 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody comes along and asks you to do something you weren't otherwise going to do, that isn't necessary either to your survival or to obey reasonable laws. Okay, drink and drive, whatever. But they just come and say, give me the swing, give me your toy, give me your money, or you must attend this school, or you have to go over here, you have to pay this fee. And if you can't say, I don't think so, that's not for me, I don't need that, I don't want that, I'm not going to participate, you are by definition not free. And we're telling children that at a very young age in the simplest terms, with the stories we give them, the messages we send about sharing and group and so forth. And that's how we separate the child from the parents. First of all, by, in many cases, employing the parents to do it. You will separate you from yourself and your own boundaries. You have to share with everybody, and they become agents themselves of the teachers. You see it all the time. You see parents who want to be the most favored parent by the school. Like, I'm the room mom, and I'm the this, and I'm the that, and the principal loves me. And what I'm like, I don't know that that's really a good thing. Like, do you really want, especially if it's the compulsory state school, why
Mhm.
are you so eager to be the most favorite person of your child's day jailers? Like, why? If you
I
could
see.
leave, like, why do you want to be the warden's favorite prisoner? So, it just seems odd to me. And so
Yeah.
they don't even know they're doing it. They don't know that they are making themselves obsolete.
I would actually recommend, as a solution to all that you described, Ayn Rand and her philosophy of objectivism, that will be a firewall against this collective insanity. And it's very interesting. You spoke about the destruction of the individual, creating an entitlement state of mind and a collective identity. This is all ideological warfare, which will
Yes,
eventually take this child and teach him that it's okay to, as you said, give up on everything, his boundaries, eventually his property, and maybe even his life itself.
that's
This is a
right.
form of slavery in the making, right?
It is. And it's a slavery of the mind. You don't need to put people in physical bondage if you can put them into mental bondage. If you, and I can't remember who it was exactly who said it. I should remember, but I don't. Who said that the hero is toil, and toil is unthinkable outside the collective.
Wow.
So the idea is that no effort that you put out into the world is worthy unless the collective says so.
Yeah.
And we see this throughout education, all the way up to credentialing, where if you could be an autodidact, you could be one of the smartest people, most educated, best read human being in your neighborhood. But if you don't have that piece of paper that said you went to university and the collective put a stamp on you and said, ready to go out in the world and produce, educated person, there, it is now so baked into us in the West that you are not educated. You are not worthy. You
And
might
even
impress individual people, but you will have a harder time.
And even worse, if you don't have the diploma, it's like you have no standing. And if,
That's
God
right.
forbid, you say the wrong things, which are not accepted by the collective, then you are being cancelled,
That's
which
right.
is
You can't possibly be smart. So it's not just you can't be good. We're not even going to treat you. You hear it in the with the commentators on the news all the time, where they talk about, first of all, they make assumptions about people not having education just because they have different views. So, for example, if they look at somebody in the United States who doesn't toe the Democrat party line, let's say, or the left wing party line, or for that matter, the Republican party line at this point, but any party line, they'll automatically go to, well, this is why people need to go to college, or this is why we can't have dumb people doing things. And then what makes you think, first of all, that everyone who goes to college is smart, or that everyone who doesn't go to college is stupid? But this is how they think. And then they'll also say things, they'll do polls all the time. I just saw one a couple weeks ago of the political views of people who went to college, didn't go to college. This is an absolutely stupid poll or stupid result. Like, this doesn't really teach you much of anything because there are so many variables other than that. So they're making blanket assumptions across the board. But the only blanket assumption I would make at this point of people who have gone to college, certainly within the last 40 years, is the likelihood that they will have a specific political bent is very high because of the ideological warfare going on in the colleges. But it's not a given. There's a limit to how much you can extrapolate from that. And you also have to believe that they're telling you the truth on the poll. People are so afraid to tell the truth about what they really think, they even lie on polls.
Yeah.
So it's and they've been trained from at least the age of 6 on to do that. And all this sharing stuff, and you have to share, and everybody, it's not fair. If you have something some other child doesn't have, you have privilege that somebody else doesn't have. And rather than just saying to a child, it's, be grateful, which I think is fine. In other words, I've said that to my own children. I'll say, be grateful that you have a roof over your head and food and you don't have certain worries that other children might have. But that's not the same thing as feel guilty. Guilt is a chosen emotion, and unearned guilt is toxic. And the way they teach, ideas of sort of walking in someone else's shoes, you talk about social emotional learning, the idea that, you should probably step back and consider the circumstances of other people, certainly before you judge them. And also even before you evaluate, all kinds of things about them. Not everyone is the same as you. Instead of teaching not everyone is the same, they'll say everyone ought to be the same, which is a completely an is ought fallacy right there. And then they say, and the reason we're not is that you have something they don't have. So that's critical theory right there. Someone is poor because you are rich or even well off. Someone is hungry because you have food. So that's false. It's just absolutely objectively false, but our children are being taught that. So rather than just simply being grateful and saying, thank you, mom and dad, for working so hard to provide for our family. And when I get big, I'm going to work hard to provide for my family, because that's how you get things, is you work hard for them. And I'm grateful to those who have worked so that I may have, which is healthy and appropriate. They're like, oh, mom and dad, do we really need a second car? The people on the other side of the planet don't have anything to eat. It's like, we are too privileged. We have things and we shouldn't have things because then those people are suffering and it's our fault. This is not healthy. And that's the difference of how they're teaching. Little red hen versus rainbow fish.
Yeah. Earlier, when you spoke about the group identity, then there are like psychological damages that are happening to those children because they are in a perpetuate group conflicts. There is
Yep.
a division, and they pit one group against the other artificially, and then they develop hatred and jealousy and all those terrible psychological attributes. When you look at it in school and the development of our children, what kind of behavior and results are you going to expect from such behaviors?
Well, you're going to see a whole lot of mob like, cult like, mob like behaviors, so that the child is maybe even sometimes acting outside of their own brain. They're going along with things they would not ordinarily go along with if they were thinking individually or if they're thinking independently. And the way you were correct in saying they're bringing them to a state of heightened sort of anxiety, because if you define your goodness and your acceptability in the society by what other people say about you or what other people think about you or whether you fit into the group, they can always pull the rug out from under you. They have perpetual control over you. All they have to do is move the goalposts a little bit. All you have to do is have one individual thought. In Anthem, Ayn Rand, took this to its farthest level, that you possibly could, where even the pronoun I is forbidden. But what you see with kids in school is this kind of clique-like behavior you'll see kids suddenly become bullies whose parents are horrified. Like, I didn't raise my child that way. But like, well, actually, you didn't raise your child at all because they've spent most of their waking hours in this building with these strangers who have told them that the number one most important thing about them is the color of their skin, or the number one most important thing about them is who they imagine, because it's trendy, they might want to someday, when they're sexually mature, have a relationship with. Because we're talking about 8-year-olds sometimes, like, I'm LGBTQ. It's like, you're 8. Stop. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people who grow up to be gay who kind of know early. It's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about this rapid 300% explosion in the people identifying non-binary. It's like, I'm not that. It's like, you're not even sexually mature. You have no idea. And these things are different. Your identity as a female or a male, in terms of how you want to walk around the world being perceived, is fundamentally different than what you're attracted to. And they're confusing the heck out of these kids, and they glom onto it because they're like, a group I can belong to, a religion I can adhere to, and I will be acceptable. And they are then led around like the rats by the Pied Piper. They'll be told, this is what we're thinking now. This is what we're doing now. If you watch some of the video of the campus protesters, there was a girl at NYU, and news reporters went up to her and said, "Why are you here? What are you protesting?" She said, and she's wearing keffiyeh. She's like, I don't know, something about like people are getting killed over in the Middle East or something like that. I'm not really that knowledgeable on it. Like, but you came out to protest about it. Yeah. And then she's like, why are we here? Why are we protesting again? Okay. So that ought to tell you, this is a college student. Imagine younger kids. And there will always be outliers. There are always those kids who are just born with a spine of steel. It's part of their personality. Remember, how we respond to these stimuli is not all nature. Some of it's nurture. And it has been from the dawn of time that it was always the outliers who did the new thing and like moved humanity forward. Okay. And so there will always be those outliers who break the mold, who just are born that way. They don't go along with the herd, whatever. And can you imagine what life is like? Well, I know what life is like for them. It's horrible. They get picked on. They have the temerity to ask questions, to buck the system. They're isolated. They're abused. And in some cases, they go all the way and take themselves out of life altogether, or they use drugs or whatever to silence the pain, to get rid of the pain of not fitting in and never being able to fit in, because the brains don't work that way. They will not conform. It just so happens the majority of humankind will conform and will do it without thinking about it. That's just the way we evolved. So these kids, the consequence is they either become bullies or they are bullied. They learn how to bully effectively so they get away with it legally, and are still approved of. And in many cases, they do it to get approval. They bully on behalf of the bigger bullies, the government, the teachers, the whomever, the activist group who's well funded with really slick PR. And they can and will, just like brown shirts before them, just like Bolsheviks before them, they can and they will take it all the way if we don't put a stop to this. This doesn't just stop. There is no natural limiting principle, because they define themselves by externalities. All the external forces who hold their mental well-being in their hands have to do is keep pushing a little farther, and now you need to kill them. And they'll do it, because otherwise they disappear. Think about it, Harry. They have nothing to hold on to. One thing that I've noticed in speaking with people who've been pulled back from the brink of this cult-like, mob-like mentality, especially the longer it takes, if they're adults when it happens, excruciating pain, because they realize two things. One, they're hollow. They have nothing to rebuild from. They have to start from almost like babyhood to figure out who they are. They've lost all their friends. They've lost maybe even a job that they had or a career or whatever, because they've finally sort of woke up and realized, I am not me. I'm like a zombie walking around following all these things. They're hollow and they get depressed. And then the second thing is this enormous weight of guilt for the things they've done and said, in particular to their family, if they abandoned or went estranged from their family. And sometimes there's no rebuilding that. And then they find themselves isolated and alone, trying to figure out how to be a human at the ripe old age of, 25 or 26 or 30 or even 40 years old. So then you'll see older people And my husband has a former teacher that he spars with on Facebook. This man has to be in his late 70s or maybe early 80s. And I genuinely believe he's fixed. It's done. Because if he were to realize what he's saying when he argues with my husband about, no, it's democracy's good. Democracy is always good. It's always for the best. And there's my husband going, what about slavery? Like once upon a time in America, they voted to keep slaves. Yeah. No, you're wrong. Like he can't let it go, because if he did, imagine he'd have to look back over his 80 some odd years of life and realize he was wrong about it all. That is incredibly destabilizing to the psyche. So they're not only teaching our kids to not have boundaries, not have a core identity. The identity lives outside themselves. It can be manipulated like little puppet strings. They separate from the people who ought to be there their whole life to, to hold them close and support them and be their gut check. But they're putting them at serious risk of the worst kind of isolation if they ever leave that grip. If they ever decide voluntarily, I don't want to do that, that's a bridge too far for me. Now imagine the college protester who was going and sitting in the tent and, go Palestinian, whatever. And then they reach the point where, and now we're going to storm the building and lock out the Jews, right? Or the Zionists, right? We know what they mean. But now we're going to do these things and we're going to beat people up, whatever. And they go, whoa. Okay, whoa. I just don't want war. I didn't sign up for this. I don't want that. What happens to that person? Mm-hmm. But it's happening. We don't see coverage of it, but I bet it's happening. I bet out of all those thousands of students, there are a handful who had a line, and they didn't want to cross the line. And I can't even imagine the consequences. They probably either got bullied into doing it anyway against their will, which is devastating, or they backed away from it. They have no friends now. They didn't have friends to start with, real friends, but you know what I mean? Now they don't even have acquaintances. Now they're watching over their shoulder and they're like, what am I going to do? Because it's not like they're going to be embraced by the people they persecuted. It's not like suddenly the Jewish students on the Columbia campus are going to say like, oh, I'm so glad that you finally realized that we deserve to live. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate that. Why don't you come into our group? That's not happening. Not that I can imagine. No. So, and you understand why. They're alone. And this is what our kids are going to be facing is I either have to stay in this group for life, choose my mate from this group, raise my children the same way. There's no leaving the cult.
So it's an identity of narratives, basically.
Correct.
And the whole purpose is just to create an activist, a political activist that can be used instead of someone who is going to learn the necessary skills to do well in the world.
Or at least a compliant little serf for the fourth industrial revolution. So they can't count on everyone being activists, nor do they need to. What do they need? Maybe like 10, 15% of people to be screaming, raging banshees. But they don't want anyone else puffing their head up to say anything. Again, be a good German. Just be the good little German. Just, go along, get along, don't say anything. So we're doing a fabulous job in the West right now, producing the epitome of the good German. And why wouldn't we? We use the Prussian model of schooling, which really was designed specifically for the purpose of raising compliant little soldiers in whatever fight the state wanted to fight. Now that could be fight in a factory. It could be fight on a battlefield. It sort of doesn't matter. Whatever it is they want you to do, they want you to do it. And you remember Klaus Schwab says, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, this is the thing. If they can just keep people passive enough, this is an ideology of activism. If they can get you really emotionally engaged. So they are always, like I said, there are outliers on the individualist side. There are also outliers on the I must be in control and I must be on the vanguard. And they get those people. And because all of this requires an emotionally heightened state of mind, not a cognitively, developed state of mind, those people will always exist. They can count on it and they can get them motivated, activated. They can pay them if need be. But the vast majority, they just want to be like sheep. To sheep. And it's so incredibly easy to do. It would frighten you how easy. We probably read the Milgram studies. Have you ever read about that?
Of course, yes.
Okay. So it's terrifyingly easy to do.
Yeah. Can you please kindly describe to the audience the different tactics and techniques of like specific things that you recognize that they are initiating in school, and how to recognize it, and what can be done other than just not sending the children there? Because,
Okay.
like, yeah, please.
Okay. So I would say there are a few tactics. They're all rooted in critical theory being the division of the world into power systems of power and privilege. Underneath that, this layer of intersectionality, in other words, that the power and privilege are also not distributed evenly across other identity markers like race and gender and or sex or whatever. Okay, religion. And these were meant to be concepts that people would explore at the college or even law school level. And it was originally about specifically law. Like when we get to the point as a society of writing laws, enforcing laws, are we truly doing it equally? Or are there some little, there's subtext in there that's dividing people up unequally? And I can understand where this came from, certainly the United States. And I can also understand why it was a worthwhile conversation to have. We should be having debates and conversations about whether or not we are truly equal under the law. So this I understand. Let's put that in a box over here. But what has happened is the people who recognize this as a way to get around especially the North American West's lack of class system that was, sort of endemic to Europe, was to go use this in lieu of class to get Marxism into the society, because we just weren't going Marxist in the United States and Canada and so forth as fast as the global Marxists wanted us to. So I think plenty of them, especially in academia, said, aha, we can use this conversation. We can use this, and they've written about it. They've actually talked openly about what a great thing it would be if we could just get the little kid, if we get them when they're much younger, to recognize, right? Paulo Freire wrote about this. All education must be about revolution. We've got to get them at the youngest age recognizing these systems of power and privilege. So they begin talking at the earliest age. We're talking kindergarten, and in some cases, preschool, about race, identifying who's what race, identifying differences between, boys and girls and this and that, even explicitly teaching them you don't have to be a boy or a girl. I mean, like, instead of just these are the colors of the rainbow, it's this is what the rainbow politically represents. Instead of just we're going to learn our numbers, it's we're going to learn our numbers by counting up how few of our Black friends have cable or what. I mean, they'll even word it that way, where they put into the lessons concepts that are way too sophisticated for a child of that age to handle, wrestle with, question, intelligently. And therefore it becomes a given. So the little kid thinks, this is how the world is. I don't know any different. The teacher is telling me. So you begin very quickly as a young child, have lessons in every subject, math. A math problem in a middle school will explicitly be about not everyone can afford to go to the roller coaster while they're comparing and contrasting speeds of roller coasters. And why does that need to be there? So it starts off that way, or it's infused across the curriculum. And if you read the books about putting critical race theory or critical theory into the curriculum, they will say that you must infuse it across the curriculum to make the children critically conscious, right? To have critical consciousness is the goal. That means every time I look at anything in the world, I'm evaluating it through a lens of who has power and who has privilege. And so instead of just looking at a thing and saying, here's my mug. Here's my mug, my Wonder Woman mug, right? And instead of saying, this is a mug.
She should be black.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, but we're looking at it in terms of, oh my goodness, white supremacy. And it's not just white supremacy. This is a privilege that someone could own a mug with a pattern on it at all. And then who can afford to buy coffee? Really? And coffee is farmed in places where they have underprivileged. And what's it doing to the environment? Suddenly, my cup of coffee in this mug becomes a political statement, an identity marker. That I am somehow enamored of my white privilege, that I am a throwback to a bygone era where Black people didn't have civil rights, that I don't mind oppressing brown people in South America. It just becomes like an insane that some little child labor person in China made the mug.
Sweatshops, yeah.
It just, and they start so young, it's crazy. There'll be lessons in science about the environmental impact of drinking coffee. There'll be lessons in math, like I said, about haves and have-nots and incomes and brown and black. And they explicitly will say, and they'll use names that make it clear too. They'll use sort of like typically black, names or whatever, or European names and so on. And it goes all the way through the curriculum. They'll choose books in the English classes that instead of being literature, classic literature, To Kill a Mockingbird, even if they read To Kill a Mockingbird, they'd spend the entire time talking about the evils of the N-word. And whether Atticus Finch was a white savior, was acting like he was a white savior and had a white savior complex, and instead of noticing the richness and beauty of this book. So this is what they do. Everything is taught through this lens. And then the kids grow up looking at the world with this immediate knee-jerk reaction of have not. This is good. This is bad. That is this. That is that. And they then evaluate themselves as being one of the good guys because they're doing it. So in other words, as long as I'm confronting my biases, my privilege, the Western hegemony, deconstructing all of that, as long as I'm doing that, I'm on team goodness. That's what they teach them. That's how they do it.
If I'm not mistaken, even in the movies, Snow White by Disney is right now a Colombian actor, and Captain America, if I'm not mistaken, is a black actor. No?
Yes. Yes.
Makes
And
sense.
it's not even, I don't really have an issue with that as such. I have an issue with the fact that they explicitly did it because. So in other words, it's not like they said, the best actor we can find who's just a stellar box office draw and is going to do a great job on this is this. They are doing it intentionally to make some kind of a statement. It's like a quota. And while at the same time, in the next breath, the very same people will tell you there are too many Jews doing this, that, and the other. There are too many white people doing this, that, and the other. So it's like they just flipped it over. And they're discriminating like crazy and being uninclusive and racist, quite frankly, against people who they've deemed have too much privilege, and elevating people who they claim do not have it, and creating a brand new set of classes that are just upside down. To me, it just feels like a lot of revenge against productive, successful, individualistic kind of people. Because as you've pointed out in the beginning of the show, if you are a member of one of these identity groups that they have constrained within a box of you will say and think this, and you step out, you're Thomas Sowell, right? You step out, you're, a conservative Jew, and you step away from the progressive notions of whatever it is, you're suddenly all bad things and canceled. You're not really a Jew. You're not really a black person. You're not really this, really that. And that has very serious consequences. So, this is how they do it to the children. It's very hard to break away from. It creeps up on you subtly. And if parents don't scrutinize the curriculum, if you just see that they're taking math and we're studying multiplication, which they don't even do anymore, but we're studying this or that math, and you go, oh, okay, that seems not woke. You're actually studying blah, blah, blah. No, you have to look deeper. I've seen lessons about the Declaration of Independence as an example in American, social studies class about American history. And the parents say, well, my school can't be woke. They're teaching the Constitution and the Declaration. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't even begin to tell you anything. Because somebody could pick it up and spend an entire semester, if they wanted to, on how these racist slave owners had the audacity to say all men are created equal while keeping slavery. And they could literally just focus on the hypocrisy, blah, 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 whatever, and not at all get to the amazing, what that document did, the risks that people took to sign it, the more objective reality of that document. They position everything in our schools today in the present, so that rather than teaching our children to look at events or people from the past in the context of the past, because they don't teach proper history. You can't do that. That would upset the apple cart of our narrative. Would they teach it in the current framework? So if we would think that somebody owning slaves is terrible now, we have to think they were terrible then too. like terrible, like evil.
Yeah.
Like it's exactly the same as if you took somebody today and said, here, own a bunch of people. But if brown people today in the Arab world are owning black people today in the Arab world, well, that's because of systems of white oppression over the years, et cetera. And then they had no choice.
Colonialism, yes.
Colonialism, and they had no. So all of these things rely on a destruction of logic, a destruction of any form of proper ethics. Everything is pseudo logic, pseudo philosophy, pseudo. It's all pseudo, and the way you can recognize it is the number of contradictions. They can't get through a day without a contradiction. But our children can't recognize the contradictions because they never knew the other side. So if you didn't know that there were two ways to look at something, or 3 or 4 or 10 or whatever, you would never know that the person speaking to you was a raging hypocrite. Why would you recognize that? You would never know that you're a raging hypocrite. You would hold these two ideas in your head at the same time without any conflict whatsoever, because you would be incapable of thinking logically. And the other way they prevent you from thinking logically is they never teach you logic. Logic, we have a capacity in our brain to learn it and understand it, but it must be taught. We haven't evolved to the point where it's inborn.
Yeah.
So we had that prefrontal cortex gives us the power of reason, but you could go your whole life and never, ever, ever develop it. In fact, most people do.
And you also need a standard, something to connect your reason to reality. They detach it by all those narratives. So you're
They
just
don't, their epistemology changes in some cases from classroom to classroom. You might have one teacher, this is how I know this is knowledge. These are facts because reasons. You might go to the next professor. No, these are facts because reasons. And what is the student supposed to do? They don't have an objective standard against which to evaluate whether something is knowledge or opinion. We used to.
Wow.
But they don't anymore. And most colleges definitely don't. I mean, if you've got people who can look at you with a straight face and say it's false to say there are only two sexes. Well, if you can say that, then imagine everything else you can throw out the window as being objectively true.
Yes. Are you positive with the Trump administration? Are things getting better, or is just another, I don't know, hoax?
It's a very complicated answer. If I isolate Donald Trump from all the people who are around him, I think he came into office genuinely wanting to, push back on a lot of these things. However, I think his personality defects get in the way of him being able to do that in a way that I personally would support, because he first and foremost is still a guy with a massive ego who needs to surround himself with people who praise him and tell him how amazing he is. He still needs that kind of adulation that a leader who needs to be truly courageous and make unpopular decisions can't be, to be effective. You can't care as much as he cares. I also think he came into office with an unhealthy desire to get revenge against the people who harmed him. Now, I get it. Believe me, I get it. The way he was treated was just horrendous. But I think the way you get revenge is you do well. In other words, you don't necessarily come in and make it your business immediately to go after those people for your personal reasons. And I think there's a little of that going on. But let me stick to education, because that's what I know best. And I don't want to, I'm knee-jerk opposed to tariffs and always will be. It's a tax on the consumer. So I'm not going to support tariffs, least of all with an income tax. If you tell me we're getting rid of income taxes across the board, then I would be more interested in entertaining tariffs. I don't even like them as a negotiating tool because I don't think they work. They were already taxing our stuff like crazy. Their consumers were already getting penalized. It's not really going to hurt them that much more. That the things that we buy, it's probably going to hurt us more because we don't make a lot of things.
You will have to pay more. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll pay more. The money, if you told me the money collected from these tariffs, which by the way, I don't think is going to be as high as they think, because everything's going to shift. We're going to buy less, people are going to order less. Everything's going to shift to where the income from it, I don't think is going to be worth the damage that it does to our economy. And in particular, the savings of older people. the prospects for younger people to get jobs, I think it's going to be devastating. And I really wish that he had better advisors than he's got. I think he's got some unhealthily nationalistic advisors who actually probably secretly want to break things and want to make it so the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency for their own personal gain. And I'm very suspicious of them, and I don't approve of that. So I'm not very hopeful that things are going to get markedly better for us economically. And when it comes to education, as I said, I am pretty much devastated. I'm really devastated. Part of why I've absented myself from X, aside from just the mental turmoil of seeing all the anti-Semitism, is the adulation he's getting for allegedly dismantling the Department of Education is more than I can stomach. It's such a lie. It is theater. And I mean, right out of the horse's mouth the other day, Corey DeAngelis, Mr. School Choice, was saying, it's happening. This is being moved to this department. This is being moved to this department. I'm like, what's happening? You're moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. There is, and people will tell me, but this is incrementalism. Where do we have to do this before we can get rid of it? I'm like, that doesn't even pass the smell test. You don't take functions that you claim shouldn't be. It's the functions that are the problem. It's not the building. It's not that there's a building at the Department of Education with a label over the door that caused the problem in education. It's the federal control. It's the federal involvement. You don't change that in any meaningful way by moving those functions and the people who perform them to other departments, cabinet level departments. In fact, you make it that much harder for the American people to watchdog it. It was already challenging for us to watchdog the Department of Education's data mining and mental health interference and financial tinkering and all of these things. With one department, now they're going to be in 6 or 7. It's going to be nigh impossible to have this happen. And then people say, but they're opening up investigations, civil rights investigations into the schools that have done this and that. I'm like, well, that should have happened already. So I don't give someone lots of credit for doing their job. That should have been Joe Biden's not doing his job. Okay, now Donald Trump's Secretary of Education is going to do her job and look at these complaints. But we don't cheer for that. We don't cheer for someone showing up to work. And we wouldn't need this in the first place if education were decentralized, at least at the state level. So he hasn't dismantled anything. In fact, he seized more power because in conjunction with this breaking it into pieces and farming it out, it's like all they've done is what these people do on Wall Street, where they take a company and they break up its pieces and they, sell it off. That's all they've done, except they've sold it back to the American people who didn't want it in the first place. And so now they're opening up a new can of worms called federal school choice, where they're going to use the money they don't want to let go of, the power they don't want to let go of, and the agency departments that they have just moved to essentially bribe and cajole and whatever states into creating government's so-called school choice, which is really just corporate fascism. Because now what they've done is they've opened up a third lane, so you have your truly private, which is moms, dads, homeschooling, et cetera, which is getting squeezed. You have public, where it's just fully funded by the government. You show up, you don't pay anything, et cetera. It all goes through that way. And then the third lane is going to be public dollars going to private corporations to make schools.
Wow.
And if the money is not going to go directly, it's going to vary by which scheme they choose. They will either choose a scheme where they do like a charter situation, which we've had already, and lots, some are good, but a lot are bad, where the money goes directly to them and then they raise the rest of the funds, but it's essentially going directly to a private corporation. Many of them have used this to buy real estate. And then when the school goes under, they sell the real estate, and it's like a little real estate scam. They never really wanted to run a school. They just wanted to have the special tax breaks of buying real estate. And then you have the other way, where they're going to give private corporations what's called pay for success scholarships. So a corporation will, and it's not going to be like Duke Power or IBM. We're talking about corporations that will come into being. Like it wasn't there and now it's there. And they will say, we'll give scholarships, we'll give money to kids to come to our school or the schools that we've chosen. And you guys give us a tax break. We don't pay taxes for that. Our corporation won't pay taxes. And then the student, not the corporation that gave the scholarship. The student is on the hook to achieve success at a standard defined by the government, first and foremost, and a little bit secondarily by the scholarship awardee, who's really asking the government, what do you want it to be? And they'll make it like that. And guess who pays the price if the success metric is not reached? Not the one
People.
who gave the scholarship and got the tax break, the student. And the penalty for not achieving the success as they've defined it can be you no longer get your scholarship. You are now forced in perpetuity into the public system. Wasn't that a neat little trick? Almost
And
sounds
I
like money laundering.
and I wonder if those specific corporations that will be invented out of thin air by the force of the government are going to apply ESG,
Of course.
and all the rest of it, right?
Of course. And people think, well, because it's Trump setting this up and because it's Peter Thiel and all these other people behind it, oh no, it's going to be conservative or libertarian. Or, don't we want public-private partnership? Like public-private partnership is fascism. That's just a fancy term for fascism. And no, you don't want it. You don't want any of this because you don't want anybody but you, mom and dad, to be deciding what success standards should be. The more you give that over to other people, and remember, they can change it. The next administration comes in.
They already have the infrastructure.
Right. And by the way, they don't have the infrastructure. So what's it going to be? It's going to be AI. They're not even how do we make the most money off this little endeavor? Oh, I know. We'll use computers and we'll use AI tutors. We're not going to use human teachers. It's all going to be adaptive learning, which is super easy to turn into a little Skinnerian project of behavior modification. You're literally sitting a kid in front of a screen and they're like, hit the button. Okay, now this other problem comes up, hit the button, do this. And this is to prepare them. Instead of working in factories, they're being prepared to sit in front of terminals and train AI all day.
So programming the people and data mining them endlessly.
Correct.
Wow.
It is the matrix being built as we speak. And so the Trump administration, I've been lighting my hair on fire because I think this 80-year-old man, no offense, he seems pretty spry and with it and everything, but I genuinely don't think he understands any of this. I really don't. I mean, I don't. I have a lot of things negative to say about the guy, but I don't think he's pure evil. Like, I don't think he knows this is what they're doing and he's all down with it. I think he genuinely thinks that this money is going to go to like 10 kids to like a brick and mortar private school. I think he's being advised by very shady people. I think if you look up the Heritage Foundation Project 2025 and you read the section on education, it is exactly what's happening. So all that defense during the campaign of, I've never read it. I don't even know what it says, whatever. Well, maybe you should have, sir, because you picked, or Heritage picked for you, Linda McMahon, who sat there in her confirmation hearing and practically read from it. They were asking her questions. Well, that would be better handled by Health and Human Services. Well, I think that would be better over at Commerce. Well, we're looking into putting this over. She's practically quoting from the document. And there were, we love to pick on the left, and they deserve it most of the time. But they also sometimes they get a few things right. And one of the things they got right is that Project 2025 should not be the thing that we just implement from the top down, because that cuts us, the represented, allegedly, out of the mix. This isn't shrinking government. This is not representing the taxpayers. This is not dismantling the deep state. This is entrenching the deep state like a tick.
Wow.
And so I'm pretty much beside myself about it. And every time I talk to people who haven't done the work I've done, or the Courtney's done, or Courtney Turner, or Lynn Taylor, or any of these number of people who've been like up to our eyeballs in reading these things, they think we're crazy. They think we're insane, but what's the problem with school choice? I'm like, well, what's the problem with Black Lives Matter? It's a thought terminating trick, the use of this language, school choice. First of all, notice it's not education liberty. It's school. What is a school? And how is a school synonymous with education? Pro tip, it's not. And then who defines what a school is? Like the boundaries of a school. Well, in the United States, It's the government. You literally cannot, in most states, call yourself a school, an academy. What are the other words for school? To those two for sure. In some states, without government approval, you have to call yourself like a learning center or something
Hmm.
like that, or tutoring agency or something, you to make it abundantly clear that you're not a school in most cases. But they've even co-opted the word. So if somebody is telling you, even I don't like homeschool for that reason, because it still has the word school in it. I prefer home-based learning, home-based education,
Hmm.
parent-directed education, because we keep it connected to the word education, which is not so easy to box. And we also eliminate that, we own this word. It's ours. Copyright.gov.
Yes.
And that's the problem with the Trump administration right now, is I think they're going to make it so that public school is not only permanent, but that any hope that states that were pursuing an end to property taxes, like Florida, I think it was very popular in Texas, forget about it. Forget about it. What does school choice rely on?
It,
Taxpayer money.
yeah.
All this freedom you claim to want, it can only exist because they're going to take the money and then start handing it out through another department, a new bureaucracy. Good luck getting rid of your property taxes now.
Why it's so hard for the conservative people and the Republicans, the libertarians to understand that free market with complete separation between the state and education is the only way? Why do they always go back to, like you said, turning it into a systematic tick?
Well, we're presupposing they actually are conservatives and not just pretending.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, conservative is and libertarian is as they do, not just as they say.
Yes.
Okay. So I always watch people's feet. It's one of the reasons I don't put a party label on myself, because I don't want to be associated with any kind of label that people are going to go, that means this, because they keep moving the goalposts, and they typically aren't really, they don't have the principles they say they have. Or they'll do things. And this is the other reason I'm not a libertarian, is they're too pragmatic often. And I'm anti-pragmatism, because you have to do away with your principles pretty much completely.
Actually, please, can you, for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that, explain to the audience what is pragmatism, and especially in education,
Yeah.
this
So
philosophy branch?
yes. So
Philosophy, yeah.
pragmatism in terms of education would be evaluating the education by its quote unquote effectiveness against some kind of standard. Like the kids can read, they can do math, oh, look, it works. And I reject that, because you can have an army of little brain dead following, government stooges who can read beautifully. Look, in China, they read very well. I used to teach Chinese students ESL, and they were, reading and doing math circles around our kids at younger ages. But if you ask them to have an independent thought, their brain would freeze and cramp. They wouldn't know how to do it.
They don't
So
integrate the information properly, right?
no, they only integrate it insofar as to do a thing with it.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost like an extension of a piece of factory equipment. They're just like, I am a little computer who is human, and I will do what is prescribed for me, and I can do it. Thinking on your own, having your own opinions, deviating from the norm is just unthinkable. Like I said, toil, the hero's toil. Toil is unthinkable outside the collective. Like Mao, that's Maoism. And we are doing this in the West. And so somebody who says, well, our schools are not performing and we need better scores and we need to bring up this and bring down that and all the fewer discipline actions, whatever. They're missing the point. That's pragmatism. I'm not interested in that. I want thinking human beings. I want free people capable of being free. Now, I mean, you could have a kid who's like not all that awesome at math, but they got a great head on their shoulders for like figuring out what's BS and what isn't. And they, they'll tell the truth. They won't be manipulated. They can walk their own, path and chart their own course and live their own destiny. And no one's going to get in their way. They're not interested in controlling anybody else. They won't let themselves be controlled. Give me that kid all day long, but over the kid who can do, quantum physics. And that's not to say we don't need people who can do quantum physics. We will have them. The beauty of it is, and our founders talked about this, is when you allow for inequality in results, whether it's economic or academic, it doesn't matter. But when you allow that, when you allow these sort of idiosyncratic ways of doing things in a truly free manner so that each person decides what's effective for themselves based on
Yes.
what they need and want, you will get an amazing number of very high achieving, because we're human beings, we're capable of amazing things. Even in medieval Europe, where people were literally serfs, look at what they built.
Yes.
Look at the artwork. Look at these things. I mean, look at what Israel's been able to do from starving people who just came out of a war, of a concentration camp, where it was like it fought off 5 armies. I mean, people can do amazing, amazing things even under horrendous conditions
If you just leave them alone.
if you just leave them alone.
Yeah.
Whereas the opposite is not true, that you cannot make perfect people. And it is a violation of the first commandment, if you're a religious person, to even try. And what we see now, and Courtney could speak to this much more, is you see people who genuinely see themselves as kinds of gods on earth.
Secular messianic. How do you say it? Secular messianic.
Yes,
Right.
they think they can use technology, and if you get in a room with a bunch of them, it's super creepy. I've been in rooms of people who feel this way, and you can't turn around without bumping into one of them who's autistic. Straight up, like, I mean, nothing. There's not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I have 2 children who are on the spectrum, but they aren't. They don't really realize what they're doing and what they're saying when they say, "No, we can use this and we can make people do." No, you can't. Human beings aren't like that. We're not machines. We don't follow a linear path. That's just not what makes us human, and it's not what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
Do you remember in Dead Poets Society where Robin Williams gets up on the desk and he's yelling at the students about poetry, and he says, "Gentlemen, we don't read poetry because it's cute." He said, engineering and all those other things. He said, they're great and they're wonderful pursuits and they make it, life possible for most of us. He said, but art, music, poetry, these are the things that make life worth living. Like, that's what we fill up our souls with. And so what they're doing is they think they can engineer people in a certain, and the irony, of course, is we're becoming more primitive, less intelligent, less productive, more violent, everything the opposite of what they think they can do, because they're so busy trying to tell us what good means.
Yeah. Anti-enlightenment in any possible way.
It absolutely is. And the Enlightenment had a dark side too, which you can discuss more with Courtney. And that's, I mean, one of the beauties of opening your mind to think is you can think about horrible thoughts too.
Yes.
But so
I would like to extract from you like a passionate call for the parents in Israel, like if you still have the time, of course.
Sure.
And like, what are you going to tell them to come to their senses as parents, as responsible human beings towards their children, and what are going to be the beneficiary of taking this responsibility if they extract the children out from the I don't know how to say it, like the dirty nails of the government. Like, what is going to change on in their relationship, in the education, and in the capacity of learning? Like, excite the parents to become father and mother again.
Well, I think in the case of Israel, it's a matter of life and death. I think it is in the West in general, but I think for Israel, it's more urgent. And the reason I say that is that we know, in particular, that the UN and all the forces behind the UN would love nothing more than for Israel to cease to exist. Yeah. And so letting the fox inside the hen house in your schools, which is what's happening. I mean, these curricula are all developed at the highest level through, all of these global institutes and research facilities and so on. And the thing that will ensure Israel's survival is its nuclear family centered structure. Its, ability to stay separate from that global pull to be one of all, because that same organization apologizes for, entertains, the grievances of the people who want you destroyed. So why would you want anything whatsoever to do with educational standards, curricula, claims, research, whatever that they approve of? It makes no sense at all. So that's the first thing. You want your children to come to you. You want them to look to the family. And that's whether you're a Jewish family or not Jewish family. I would even be, Arabs in Israel who are Muslim and want it to stay Israel. It would be
Mhm.
anybody that doesn't want to be just overrun and destroyed by this power privilege narrative. Then we get down to what that will do with your relationship. So in addition to helping on a national security level, you will get back, I believe I'm trying to remember the amount of hours. It's in the tens of thousands of hours with your children
I
that you
think it's
wouldn't otherwise have.
15,000 hours per year,
At
no?
least, yeah. And you might think, well, I can't spend that much time with my kids. Okay, I'm going to ask you to please take a step back. Your children will be not with you much longer than they will be with you. They're going to leave the nest. And I promise you, as someone who already has two out of the nest, you will feel differently. You will wish that you had more time with them. And so, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's noisy. Yes, it's inconvenient in many cases. But why in the world did you have them? Right? I mean, there was a point, right? You wanted
And
to
what is
give,
the alternative to serve some, I don't know, wage, like,
right.
yeah,
You don't want them to grow up and just be a wage slave. You want them to have a happy life. You didn't hold your baby in your arms and say, "Oh, you're going to make such a good little agent of the state." I mean, I'm pretty sure that wasn't why you had kids. Now, even if your motivation was more Jews, we just got to make more people so we're still here.
yeah,
Still, they're not going to be Jews, not in any meaningful way. If they go through a system that waters that down or says apologize for yourself, make yourself small so that everybody else doesn't feel inferior. Okay, that's ridiculous.
yes,
The whole world, first of all, should be thanking Israel for so many things, and instead is, it's the easiest thing in the world to pick on them. My friend, well, it's not, I don't think Naya said this, but another woman who was making videos similar to what Naya Lex does said that Stalin once said that the reason it's so easy to pick on the Jews is they have no land to defend them.
no, we don't.
And so that is why Israel must continue to exist. That is the remedy, even to what's happening in the rest of the world with anti-Semitism, is the fact that there's an Israel. And I'm genuinely concerned that if Israelis continue to hand their kids off even to their own state, as long as there's no constitution with a Bill of Rights protecting your civil rights in a way that is Western, like consistent with Judeo-Christian values, or at least Jewish values. Okay. As long as that doesn't exist, and as long as you are getting more and more demographic pressure, even from within, as long as you're getting more political pressure from within that comes from without, that comes from UN and those type of people, and the type of people who have already been educated to want to fit into the global community more than to be Israel. When we start having a preponderance of young people who think it's dirty, that nationalism is icky,
Yeah.
Zionism is bad, then what's going to happen to Israel? So I think it's a major problem, and it needs to be addressed. So, taking your kids out of that setting, at least putting them in a setting that is, very pro-Zionist, even if it's a school, but it's, a private school maybe, or private tutors, or get a group of people together. If you don't want to be the teacher, you'll get more time with your child. You and your child will bond in a way. And this has happened to me with getting my kids out of the public school, where they come to me with everything. They tell me everything. And I have daughters, so I don't know, how it is with sons. I've never had boys, but it is so important, especially when they're in their teenage years, where most teenagers, the parents, you want them to come to you. They're about to be adults. They're about to engage in, or are engaging in, sort of adult behaviors. They're being confronted every day with decisions that could have major implications for the rest of their life, that are somewhere between, their adult decisions, but they're still children. Their brains aren't fully formed. You want them to come to you and say, I'm getting pressure to do this, or I'm thinking of doing that, or this happened to me, or I made this decision and now I regret it. When you educate at home, and they sort of know you, and they see you, and they're with you, and they trust you, and there isn't another thing whispering in their ear 8 hours a day going, don't do that, mom and dad are bad. You can save them from a world of heartache and yourself. because whatever they do, even as young adults, even as older adults, it's going to back up on you emotionally.
Yes.
So I think the personal connection and bonding, the ability to pass on your values, your culture, and keep your country safe are the big reasons why I would do it. The academics, people want to go right to academics. They perform better on standardized tests. They'll get into college. They'll do this. Oh my goodness. Are you raising a college student or are you raising a human being? Again, isn't it ironic that the people who say we can make peaceful, wonderful people will then turn around in the very next breath and tell you career and college readiness? And I'm like, what? Why must the good person go to college? Can't you be a good person without this little piece of paper? Yes, you can. And we've also set ourselves up to have a future of people who don't want to get their hands dirty. I don't want that job. I don't want to farm. I don't want to do this. That's, that's not educated. That doesn't allow me to be a nomad with my laptop around the world and have everybody think I'm so great. We can't have an entire planet of people who live on their laptops either. And not everyone wants to. There are plenty of kids out there who are like, I want to be a goat farmer.
Yeah.
I want to grow olives and make the best olive oil on the planet. I want to make crafts and jewelry and all this thing. I want to be a tailor. I went to a store locally at Nordstrom, I think back in 2016. And the tailor there at the store, who fits the suits and so on and makes sure everything, my husband was getting a suit. And he had to be, I thought he was like 100. I mean, he was a very old man, little Jewish man, had emigrated from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, expert, master tailor, et cetera. And he's doing this. And he says, I've got to retire. I can't do this anymore, but I'm still working here because they can't find a replacement. And I don't want to leave them with high and dry without anybody to replace me. Nobody is passing these things on anymore. Entire crafts, entire things are just disappearing from the planet. And you might think that's, so what? We have machines. We don't need this, whatever. Okay, if you say so. But I would encourage people to think about what happened to the Native American tribes. And it's not exactly analogous, but, kind of. And they featured this in the most recent, one of the most recent episodes of the show 1923 on Paramount. They have some natives, they're Crow Indians, and they're sitting around a fire. And the younger one, who's about 16, is asking her father, why he's making something with beads. And she said, oh, can you show me how to do that? She said, people don't make those anymore. Why don't they make them anymore? He says, they don't know how. And she said, why? Why don't they know how? And she said, well, he said, the white man, but why? What do you mean? He said, first, when they came, we traded. So we traded our beads and our things for their things, and it was fine. And we continued to make the things to trade. And then they came and they started buying with money. They used actual printed currency and started buying the things. And so then we had money to buy things and we didn't need to trade anymore. So we stopped making the things. And then we didn't even need to make things for ourselves because we could just buy things from them, not even from each other. And we didn't have a need anymore to make them. So we don't know how anymore. And we're completely dependent on both the currency and other people to buy from because we don't know how to make the things. And I would instantly, as I'm watching them, like, oh my God, we are all on a reservation now in a weird way. So that's kind of where we are. I think with homeschooling or home-based education, whatever you want to call it, you have more. First of all, you only need 2 to 3 hours a day max to do anything academic with a book. The rest of the time, think of the things you can teach your child. Cooking, sewing, life skills, doing your taxes. I don't know, like any accounting, things they're never going to learn in a regular school classroom. They're so busy doing the social emotional garbage. You can teach them all manner of things. They can get a job at their earliest convenience. My daughter is 16, and as soon as she was 16, she got a job. And she makes more than I do. She's out waiting tables and in tips and so forth. She started last August. We're only in just April approaching, and she's got almost $10,000 saved.
Fantastic.
Of her own. And I bought the kid a safe. for this last, holiday. I was like, I said, what would you like for your present? She said, I need a safe. And I'm like, okay, that's an
Mhm.
interesting gift, but that's what you want. So she has a personal safe. It's got, all the things and whatever. And she opened it up the other day because she has a bank account too, of course, with a high yield savings and all that, but they give her lots of cash and she has to then like take it over to deposit it. But she's like, ugh, I'm lazy. So the other day I said, how much she looks like a drug dealer. She pulls so it's all honestly earned. I take her to work and bring her home. But this child has built more confidence, more maturity, more sense of perspective on the world and other people and, what she wants to do with her life, just having a job
Yes.
than she ever would in a classroom, conforming to like, oh, the bell goes off, time to go here. Oh no, you may not go to the bathroom. You have to do this. You have to do that. Use pen, not pencil, blah, blah, blah. No, she's not one to be pushed around. And I'm so pleased to also report, for those who are concerned about children approaching teenage years, that she's also, of my children, because she's now been homeschooled the longest, she's the most level-headed when it comes to peer influence. So when she meets people and they start engaging in, conversations about things, or they start talking about going to do things, she's like, nuh-uh, I'm not doing that. That's stupid. Because
Beautiful.
she's not afraid to think for herself. She doesn't worry. She says, well, I don't need that friend. Isn't that the
Mhm.
dream of every parent?
Absolutely.
And that's not because I sit over her like some kind of, ogre saying you can't go out and you must not do this. Obviously I don't do drugs and all the normal things that parents say, but this is because she's literally free to
Mhm.
evaluate her options and evaluate whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, and doesn't believe that if she's rejected, she ceases to exist. She knows perfectly well that's not true. So that's it. That's an inoculation against all the manipulation and bad things that could ever happen.
I love it. Inoculation. Beautiful. And what are you going to say to the parents who are worried about socializing? They are not going to have enough friends. What to do about that? What is the answer
Yes,
there?
well, it is a concern. So I'm not going to just brush it off. What I will say is that I hate to compare children to dogs, but bear with me here. If
Mhm.
you've ever had a puppy, if you ever got a puppy, one of the first things they tell you is make sure you socialize it. Well, they don't send it to puppy school to socialize it, do they? They go out for walks. They go outside. They take it to places where dogs are allowed and there are people and there are children and there are other dogs, and they go to the park and they do things. And guess what? The pup becomes acclimated and socialized to this is what life is like, and I don't need to be afraid of all these things. Well, the children going to school right now, I hate to break the news to you, are being socialized to seek out a clique and adhere to what its values and its structures are, like their life depends on it. That I don't think that's the socialization you parents were looking for. I think what you just want, if you're really going to put a fine point on it, is you don't want your kids to be weird.
Mhm.
Okay. And you don't want your kids to be overly anxious around other people, and you want them to know how to make a friend. Okay. Well, guess what? Just like that little puppy is going to learn from your modeling and taking them places with her, they're going to learn from you. If you have friends and you to go out and you talk to people in front of them and you engage in conversation and you have people maybe over to your home, or you meet up out in a park or a restaurant or what have you, or go over to your extended family's house and sit around and have a meal, that's socialization. And your children will probably be better socialized than the kids in school who are sequestered in a same age classroom. When in life does that ever happen again? Where you
Never.
spend all day with people who are exactly the same age within these months. It
Which
doesn't
you
happen.
cannot even choose, right? You're just
You can't
stuck with a
choose.
bunch of children that you don't know what's their background, what they experience at home, and
No,
it's like
you have no idea. And again, you might find yourself sort of like bullied and coerced into a group of friends that maybe you wouldn't choose if you were free to choose. And same for you, mom and dad. You might find that your child's new best friend is someone you would rather they never met.
Mhm.
And now what are you going to say? You can't socialize with that person? I mean, I know Israeli parents are very direct, but that still might be challenging. So I would just say that when people ask me, aren't you afraid about socialization? Yes, I definitely am, which is why I don't send them to school, because increasingly parents who do send their kids to school are taking a very hands-off approach. Like, I send them to school for that. I send them to school for that. And so they're getting everything from school. And then those are not the kids I necessarily want hanging around my kids. I want my children to be with kids who are not like-minded in terms of politics, but like-minded in terms of active minds. They like to read, they like to do things, they have a work ethic, they have a sense of right and wrong, and so on. And my daughters, so my eldest two are in college, my youngest is a junior in high school, but homeschooled, and she's the youngest in particular now has friends who are adults. And you might think, well, that's odd. And don't you find that to be strange? No, because it's through her sport. She's an acrobat. She goes to these acrobatics classes. She takes it very seriously. She'd like to be a trainer someday, a teacher. But she progressed out of the youth classes. She's too old for the youth classes, so she has to go to the adult classes. So now there are people who are anywhere from early 20s to 40s in her class. So they are shocked to find out she's 16. They keep forgetting. Same with people at her work. Even though she has braces, they've got adults have braces now too. So they're like, I keep forgetting. Now that doesn't mean they talk about inappropriate things. It's a polite environment, where people are not talking trash. But at the same time, she sees people at different stages of life. She's able to ask them questions about their jobs, about the fields they work in, about tips for how to get, choose a career. These people are almost pseudo mentors more than like bosom buddy friends. She still has friends her own age that she's made through other means, but she's picking her friends. I have almost nothing to do with it, which by the way is appropriate. You really shouldn't be picking your teenagers' friends. But if you feel like you wish you could, that means that the social environment they're in is probably not good.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were kids, we picked our own friends. So they should be able to do it too. And she will do this. She has had a series of friends and she tells me everything. So I hear about their conversations. And then she'll say to me, I'm no longer speaking to this person. Oh, do tell. What happened? And I get the full lowdown and all I can feel is pride because I realized like she sat and agonized over what do I do? Do I remain friends with this person? Do I not remain friends with this person? And here's my conclusion. And to come to me with the final decision and realize how much thought went into it. And I just think, I can't even take a lot of credit for that. So it's not like I'm saying, I am this wonderful home educator and it does all of me. No, it's the fact that she's not in a school. She has the freedom, the time to step back, not be near these people, be near these people, and think for herself. And then come to me as the touch point, the moral and ethical touch point of, hey, mom, this thing is happening. What do you think? And then I usually say something like, well, what do you think? It's usually the best question with a teenager, right? You don't want to go, well, because that might be a setup, an ambush. But your socialization concerns are real, but I want you to apply the same concern to the school. It's not a one-sided thing. It's always like, well, how are they going to socialize? Well, socializing and being socialized are two separate things, but you should want the socialization to precede the socializing. You shouldn't want your kids to socialize with people who are poorly socialized.
So to be very selective, to find
Yes.
the qualities that
Your child is one of a kind.
absolutely.
It's one of a kind. It's a snowflake. And I hate to use that because people go, that makes weak or what. No, they're unique and special and precious. And they should be able to choose. And maybe they'll end up weird by somebody's standards. They only have 2 friends. But how many friends do you have? I mean, I don't have a ton of friends. That's the other thing. I'll ask parents, like, do you want your child to be exactly like you? Or do you want them to just be their best self? Because I know there are a lot of parents I meet who are super extroverts and have big groups of friends. And they're like, my kid is very shy. And I just worry they're not going to come out of their shell. And if I don't send them to school, they're never going to learn to come out of their shell. I have news for you. Shyness, first of all, is not a disease, nor is it a negative character trait. It's just who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing you should concern yourself with is, are they insecure? Shyness is not insecurity. Some people are shy because they're secure and very composed and they don't want to they want to be very choosy. It's not even shyness of insecurity. So be careful what you label shy versus insecure versus, those things. Some people look like they're very outgoing and they're deeply insecure. And the reason they're so outgoing is they need approval constantly. So they
Endless
have a
approval.
gaggle of friends. So the benchmark shouldn't be how many friends do they have or how weird do they sing compared to other kids. It should be how happy and self-possessed and self-confident is my child, even if they have 0 friends. That's all that matters.
Yes. I agree with everything, 100%. Do you feel that that you spoke enough about the social emotional learning, or maybe there's more that you should add about that?
Well, the only thing I would add is that they've begun to disguise it because there's, at least in the United States, there's pushback. Parents have figured out the social engineering project that it is, that they're trying to turn kids into global citizens with no boundaries, emotional or ideological. So they've started recasting it as character education or mental wellness or just wellness, just the word
Hmm.
wellness,
Wow.
what else are they calling it? So character education, wellness education, they're bundling it in with so-called health and wellness. They're hiding it, they're disguising it. What you need to be looking for is anything that is not self-evidently academic, math,
Hmm.
science, English, etc. But even within those subjects, here's what to look for. Look for book choices that have a heavy emotional or dramatic, if they're reading literature. Now, there's always some drama in literature, but is it struggle literature? And what do I mean by struggle literature? Is the plot about somebody struggling against some,
Pressure.
um, yeah, like oppressor or what have you? Is there a racial component? Is there a fair amount of anxiety inducing action like rape? Or the things like that going on? Because these are used to strip raw the child psychologically and emotionally and expose them to something really unsettling. And then the way it's discussed and taught, or even the writing questions, if they don't discuss it in class, if they just have writing questions, how do you feel about this? So the questions are not, let's analyze the characters' relationships, or let's analyze the metaphors, blah blah blah, the literary devices. It ends up being an interrogation of the child's feelings, so that suddenly reading a work of fiction becomes some kind of pseudo therapeutic thing. So that's how it gets into the curriculum. How did you feel when this person was attacked by the cop? How did it make you feel to know that these people had no food to eat? Whether they're getting inside the child's own head. The beauty of reading literature used to be for a child in school that they could experience certain kind of traumatic things that other people are going through at a distance,
Hmm.
right? They could walk in someone else's shoes, but not really. Like they could decide. The child could decide where they need to cut it off, so that in their mind they're picturing things, but I don't need to picture everything. If you then sit down and the essay question is so explicit and puts you in that space and says, "And now report back to me, your teacher, all the things that it made you feel," that's a violation. It's an emotional boundary violation. They don't, it's an assignment. So they don't have the option to say, I don't want to write about this. I don't want to talk about this. This made me very upset. And I don't want to tell you that it made me upset. Can I write about something else? No. So this is what's happening. I have students come to me for tutoring and they'll show me their assignments, and my jaw drops because the parents have no idea. They think,
Can you
oh, they're
give one
doing stuff.
specific example, please?
Sure. So recently I had a student reading a book. I'm trying to remember the title of this book. It escapes me. But it was basically about a situation where there's, a brother is murdered by cops,
Hmm.
and the child, the daughter wants revenge. So the rest of the book is all about wanting revenge against the cops and not getting it. Basically, the bad, horrible cop gets away with it, that kind of thing. And the student came to me, and the question was, how do how do you feel? Write about how you feel knowing that police officers can get away with murder. And no question mark there, just a blanket statement. So I had to sit there and do what the teacher wasn't doing. And I had to say first to the student, let's evaluate the hidden premise. And the student said, what do you mean? Didn't know what a hidden premise was. And I said, well, what does the question assume is true that may or may not be true? And it took an inordinately long time for this student, who was supposedly otherwise an A student, to arrive at the realization that saying that police officers can get away with murder is a premise. It's not fact.
Hmm.
And then I said, all right, well, let's just take a look at that. Do you agree with that premise based on just just your own gut feeling? Do you think that's true? Do you think that police officers can get away with murder? And then we had to have a discussion about what murder is, because just shooting somebody in the
Hmm.
act of arresting whoever is not necessarily murder, right? So the student didn't even know that there's a definition of murder. The implication was cop shoots person, that's by default murder. Doesn't matter if they were armed, doesn't matter if they were threatening, doesn't matter what they were doing, holding a hostage, whatever. No, but that's murder. So look how many baked in premises were there in this one question. And then
Yeah.
it was about the student's own feelings. So I'm asking you to divulge feelings you have about a premise that I have already asked you to accept. And you're like in 9th grade. So you're not even really old enough to know if any of this is true. So I spend the tutoring session we actually looked it up. I said, let's look up the statistics. Let's see if this is true. We're in the United States. So I look up the statistics. How many officer involved shootings are there of unarmed people? I said, and let's then further ask ourselves if even that is murder,
Yes.
right? But let's
Hmm.
start there. And when the student saw how low the number was, she was expecting, I said, how many do you think we're going to find? She's like, I don't know, like 1 million? Like, I was like, oh my God. Right. So this is when she got all the way to 9th grade, thinking that like 1 million people are shot by police every year and just walk around afterwards like everything's fine. So when we look and we see it's like a few hundred, she's like, oh my God, I thought it was way more than that. I think it's even less than that. And then I said, okay, now let's assume that even half of these are murder, like cold-blooded, like I'm killing you, right? Now, what happens afterwards? Do you know what happens after there's an officer-involved shooting? She's like, no. So we went through all of that. And then I said, so now, would your answer be different to the how do you feel about this question if you don't agree with the question?
Hmm.
She's like, yeah, I don't agree with the question anymore. And she didn't really agree with it to start with. She had no frame of reference to challenge it. So she's like, I don't agree with this at all. I said, well, what are you going to do? I said, this is an assignment. It's due. What are you going to do? She said, I don't know. What should I do? She was absolutely beside herself. She's like, I have to answer this question. I said, what if, I said, and full disclosure, you might get a bad grade. I can't promise you that you won't get a bad grade for doing this. I said, what if you respond by saying, if this were true, certainly I would not like it. However, and then write an essay that reflects reality. What do you think about that? She's like, yeah, I like that better. So that way she's kind of saying like, well, if this were a true statement, I would say that. But notice also how the question had nothing to do with the book. They treated a work of literature like it's truth across the board. They weren't speaking about the specific characteristics. Now, this would be a valid question. How do you feel about the fact that the police officer in the book got away with shooting so-and-so's brother without any repercussions? That's a legitimate question. We're isolating it to the book. I still don't like that it's a how do you feel question, because it's none of your damn business how I feel about it. You should be asking me what I think about how the author uses this to tell us that story or whatever, not what my innermost feelings are, but it's still a better question.
Hmm.
And even then, the student should have a right to say, I don't want to tell you. None of your beeswax. And I don't think parents stop and think long enough or at all about how many times their children are being asked by agents of the state, how do you feel about XYZ? None of your damn business. It is not. I did a little short video about how it's none of the teacher's business how your child feels on a given day. And SEL is now, that's how it's in the curriculum, like infused in these little ways. But also there are explicit questionnaires where they were in their wellness class or whatever. They'll be like, let's take a temperature. Let's take your inventory of feelings today. Today, I feel this. Yesterday,
Wow.
I felt that. Oh, no, they're explicitly acting like they have a right to ask kids. And when a student is given a piece of paper or a thing on a screen that checks off boxes, they don't think they can say, I'm not doing it. This is not, you have no right to ask me this. And I'm not obliged to answer. So parents, first thing you should do is make sure your children know that they are not obliged to answer these questions. That is data that they're gathering that's going to go in their permanent record about their feelings, and decisions will be made. If your child is tired that day or sad because dog died, or, grandma's in the hospital, or, bombs are falling all over the place, whatever. And they're constantly, I'm anxious, I'm sad, and this and that. Next thing they're going to be is assigned a counselor, potentially without you knowing about it. And then they're going to be sitting in a room without you there with some head shrinking person tinkering around in your child's brain and letting them believe that they're perfectly normal anxious feelings about, air raid sirens and God only knows what, are somehow a pathology. What are we going to do about this? Like, it's with the kid has to fix it, instead of, let's distract you. Let's distract you. Let's go look at something else. Let's be alive. Let's talk about other things. Let's read books about other topics. Miring children down in adult problems and adult level emotions about things they have no control over is a recipe for anxiety. And that is why we have so many anxious kids. That is why so many people are on antidepressants. That is why there's such a high rate of suicidal ideation, because they're putting adult things on brains and psyches that are not ready to deal with it. That's social emotional learning too. And it's done intentionally. If you're in a constant state of anxiety, what is the first thing you're going to look for?
I don't know.
Safety, reassurance.
Oh.
Who's nearest to give it to you?
Should be the parents.
It should be, but it isn't, because you're in school. So it's going to be your peers, may not be the healthiest ones, or the state.
Yes.
And how are they going to? We'll take care of it. We got this. Just let us do more so you can do less. And we'll take care of it. You don't, people who are afraid are the easiest people to manipulate. Look at any case of domestic abuse and you ask, why didn't you leave him? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you blah, blah, blah? It's like, they're terrified 24/7. They don't have a self anymore. Their self is gone. It's been murdered. They are just a shell. And that is why they don't leave. Well, the same is happening to your child on a little microscopic level every single day. It's an abusive relationship with a smile. We love all of our students. How do you feel? Do you feel?
Unbelievable. So it's like invoking specific emotions instead of teaching them anything that actually gonna help them in life, and then they become bitter and resentful and envy and all the rest of it.
If you ever hear a teacher say, or in the course of learning how to teach, if you ever hear somebody say, first you have to build a relationship with your students before you can teach them, that is a flagrant lie. Okay, it's as big a lie as the other one they tell all the time is, well, how can children learn if they're unwell, if they're emotionally unwell? So we have to get them emotionally feeling good. We have to get control of their emotions before they can learn. Totally false. There are children who live in chaotic homes that you wouldn't want to go back to, who come to school and structure and learning and memorizing and being distracted by books and learning is a respite. It saves them from all of that crap. Okay. Or they're dirt poor and going to school and it's like, okay, I can read the books. I can do the things. I don't have to think about the things. If you say, no, let's sit in your problems for a while. And then when we are sufficiently reassured that your problems, then you can learn. Well, first of all, you're wasting the person's time because you don't have that power to make their problems go away or make them feel good or whatever it is you want to make them feel. And secondly, it doesn't work. So, I mean, it actually doesn't work that way. You get people mired in the emotions, they can't learn. You insist on having a relationship with your students. You can't do that. You can't make a relationship. You know where kids actually like their teachers the best and end up having a fondness for them or a relationship with them is when they respect them. When they go in and they say, you didn't just waste my hour. You taught me something that I need. And
So
even if you were a little...
They're creating equality even between the teacher and the students.
Except not really. It's fake. It's an illusion of equality. It's like, hey, call me by my first name. The teacher's coming into class wearing like a graphic tee and having colored hair and fancy jewelry and all these things to be like, yeah, I'm cool. I'm one of you. I'm going to talk in your language. I'm going to talk in Gen Z speak and so on. Or if they do things like, I actually heard a teacher say this the other day. We have to allow them audiobooks because reading the books is too hard and we don't want them to struggle.
What is that?
Can you imagine? So, it's really sad because they assume that the kids appreciate this or are grateful for it, or no, they just hate you. They know you're making it easier for them. I actually had a student come to me a week ago. The father wanted to sign the child up. He pulled him out of school. because the kid was having trouble with everything and was miserable at school. Pulled the kid out of school and is trying to send him to a really good high school next year, but wanted to spend the summer getting him ready for the high school, getting him caught up with his reading and his writing and all these things. Came to me for 3 sessions a week he wanted. And after the first session, I had to fire the family. Meaning like, I can't work with you. And here's why. Because I sat with a student for an hour and the father's like, I want him reading books. I want him writing. This student was so far gone as an 8th grader that I don't have the ability to reach him. I'm not saying he can't be reached by someone, but it wasn't going to be me. He would not make any eye contact whatsoever with me. And I mean, not even look at the camera. He was like over in the corner of the camera. I was trying to engage him and talk about books and what books he'd like. Reading is stupid. Wow. I said, oh, tell me more. Why do you think it's stupid? In other words, I wasn't arguing with him. I was just trying to engage. He's like, oh, why do I need to? Anyway, I mean, I could just listen to an audiobook if I need to, have something read or whatever. I don't need to read books. It's boring. Everything he said was boring. The only books he likes are graphic novels. I said, well, tell me what you like about graphic novels. He said, well, they're entertaining because they have pictures. And I don't want to read something if I'm not entertained. And I said, so you don't think that a book without pictures could possibly entertain you? No, never does. Never will. No, I don't think so. But he wasn't speaking to me in a way of saying, I guess it's possible for some people, but it just doesn't work for me. No, he was like, no, it's not possible. It isn't true. Like, it just blanket isn't true. And I started showing him books that I thought we could read where I could change his mind. And he said, no, I read that. I said, I thought you didn't read. So I get the impression he was straight up lying. And then I asked him in a couple of cases, well, tell me what it was about this book you didn't like. I don't remember, but you remember you didn't like it. Yeah, it was boring. Everything was boring. And I said, all right, well, we are going to have to pick something. So what I'll do is I'll send a list to your dad and maybe you can take a little more time together and figure one out. And you can choose one because he said, well, why don't you just assign me one like the schools do? I said, I don't want to assign you, but you've just told me you think all reading is boring. If I assign you a book, you're already coming at it with that way. I want you to have some buy into this. I want you to help pick. I'll pick the list, but you pick from the list. And he was like, I don't think that's going to work, whatever. I said, all right, well, I'll discuss it with your father. And then the dad cut it off. It was supposed to be an hour. We were supposed to then transition to a writing lesson. And he cut it off at like 25 minutes because he got the time wrong or whatever. I don't know. So in any event, the father then writes to me like very haughty, like he was ordering off a menu. And he says, look, my kid has to go to school next year. And so I want you to, I picked a book on read this book with him and then give him these assignments. In school, they do this. I want you to do that. And I'm thinking, he's doing poorly in school. You came to me because I'm not school. And yet you want me to do what school was doing. And you want to pick a book and you want me to sign a book and you want me to, that's what he's had. That's why he is who he is. He is bored. He's miserable. He doesn't trust anybody. He won't look at me in the eye. He thinks all teachers are, he actually said at one point, he said, I don't think teachers are very smart. I said, why do you say that? He said, because everybody cheats. And I said, how do you know they cheat? He goes, because I know what my friends do and everybody cheats. And he was just so apathetic and cynical. What, 8th grade?
Wow.
And I realized, I was like, I get to choose too. I get to choose as a teacher, as a tutor. I don't have to work with someone who doesn't want to learn. And so I wrote back to the dad who was being very officious with me. He was like, you'll do this and you'll do that. I said, I don't think this is a constructive working relationship. So I think you should probably go find another tutor to find a better fit, because I've worked with kids who are way behind, but they want to learn. And even those who come to me and say, my teacher's not teaching me and I don't like my teacher and my teacher thinks I don't know the blah, blah, blah. I've managed to get them, but they have to want to learn. And the danger of these kids being in school for too long with the wrong teachers is they can cross a threshold. Not every single one of them, but they can cross a threshold. It's more common in boys than in girls, where they don't see the point to any of it. They don't see the point to any of it. And it's not that they want to do something else. I ask them, what are your hobbies? Do you have any other interests? No.
Why it's more common with boys than girls?
I wish I knew the answer, but if I had to guess, this is a hypothesis. I think it's because in addition to everything being so regimented in the school, where any child feels hemmed in, boys have a tendency to mature emotionally more slowly. That's just nature. not in every case, but in most cases. And school is set up with all this externalizing of emotions and approval, and I should care what everyone thinks of me. That's a more, to be stereotypical, but it's a little bit more feminine oriented way of looking
Environment.
at the world.
Mm-hmm.
um there's very little time outside. There's very little time to run around and play. There's very little time to like get your frustrations out physically. And more boys, not all, again, I have to qualify this as not all, but more, it's more typical for boys to be more physically active, more energetic, and you're constrained, sit down, say da, da, da. Even if they're in a group around a table, it's still not their time. Girls don't like it either. I don't mean to say, but it's a little bit easier adaptation for girls who are from a very young age socialized and acculturated and even genetically more inclined towards nurturing kind of behaviors to acclimate to this than for boys. So they feel more hemmed in at an earlier age for longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that contributes to the likelihood that they get to be more apathetic and more whatever. Also, and this is just something that is true for girls too, but it doesn't show on the outside the same way it does. You find it out later with girls, but not everyone's academically inclined. That doesn't mean they're not smart. Please don't hear me saying they're not smart. So my youngest is a classic example. Very smart, very like intellectually very, very smart, does not like academics though. So she goes through the course, she goes through her math, she goes through English, whatever, because she has to, because we've got to graduate, even in homeschool, you have to graduate them. But where her talent lies is in being productive and working and functioning in the real world. And she wants to go into doing hair and cosmetology and all this kind of stuff. Like she wants to work with her hands and she wants to work with people. And she just has no interest in the rest of it. Not to say she doesn't like to read a book. She likes to read a good book, but it's the academic thing is just not her thing. She just was never driven, didn't have any ambition to be like the straight A student with the, she gets good grades, but that's not her ambition. That's not where it lies. And there are plenty of kids who are like that, who would rather do any number of other things than go to university and become an expert in some academic book level subject. And I think we parents need to be more aware of that and don't give in to the societal pressure that that first of all, we'll be evaluated as parents if our kids don't go to university. You obviously failed. Your kid is not a doctor, your kid is not a lawyer or professional or software engineer or major entrepreneur, blah, 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 blah. Then like, what's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with you. If your child is happy and healthy and have a wonderful relationship with them and they maybe find a wonderful person to settle down and have babies with, whatever, you did a bang up job. You did better than most. It's like, you can mess up. I think I read like 30% of parenting, you can completely screw up and your kids are still going to probably be okay. But we evaluate ourselves, and culturally, Jews tend to do this more than most.
Yes.
On how academically accomplished our children are. And I think it puts an inordinate amount of pressure on them to be and do things and be in spaces that are not necessarily healthy either for them as individuals or even for us as people, as a culture. Because those environments don't like us very much right now.
They don't. A short question. Every time I'm sending a lecture or some documentary or a text to my friends and people that I know, like sit down, listen to that it's mind blowing. They listen for 5 or 10 minutes. They either fall asleep or lose attention. Is there any solution for that, or it's like too late?
Well, there's a solution if you're talking about how do I get messages out to people like that or encourage them to watch a longer broadcast or get longer messages, is that we have developed, because of technology, into sort of a short attention span soundbite kind of people. So you can't fix it. Yes, we are that way. You'd probably, if you were honest, you'd probably admit that it's a rare podcast. You'll listen to all of it yourself, because we also have busy schedules, so we don't have a lot of time. So you need to break off chunks of things and make little clips of what you think is really vital and give them, 4 or 5 of those to the point where they realize like, okay, there's value. I'm going to now set aside the time for this. So I try, when there's somebody I really want to get a message, I give them a clip of it rather than the entire thing, because I can't ask somebody to commit to 2 hours who isn't already bought in either on the subject or me or my guest or something like that. So the average person isn't. And Education in particular is a tough one because there's so much cognitive dissonance in, parents accepting that the place I send my child every day, that I believe I have to, either because the government tells me I have to, or because I can't envision another life. Like I can't step outside this paradigm and picture my life any other way. They don't want to hear it.
Yes.
They actively don't want to hear it. And it's not very flattering to them to say, but it is understandable. It's like the same as, if you know you need to lose weight, you know that you do. You know that you're, on borrowed time if you keep eating the food and you got the diabetes, whatever your problem is. But the last thing you're going to want to watch on any given day, if you haven't made up your mind yet to do it yourself, is the podcast about losing weight.
Yes.
You'd be like, nah, same thing here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a lot to ask.
One last question. I know you're so passionate and I love your work. I think it's amazing. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
everything that you do. And I know that you're going to continue what you're doing because that's your calling. It's like you're a warrior of truth. But are you hopeful for the future? Is it because sometimes I feel like it's too late already. We can't turn the boat. What do you think?
Um, it depends on how far ahead into the future we are going to look. So the near future, no. I genuinely believe things have to get a whole lot worse before they're going to get better. I think people are still far too comfortable for things to get better. However, I am hopeful that more and more individuals are waking up to the reality that there is no Superman coming, that nobody's going to fix it. I mean, I hope more people are waking up to the reality that Donald Trump is certainly not the American Superman they hoped he would be. And so I see more people striking out on their own, not just homeschooling, but even finding ways to make a living that don't involve being an employee, finding ways to downsize their lives, finding ways to go off, not literally off grid, but, sort of like off and do their own stuff. What I am hopeful for is the people who realize that there's the future and their future, and they are going to take control of theirs and their children's come what may. And I'm not saying go full prepper. They're just going to start focusing on their families, focusing on making their daily life as rich as it can possibly be, focusing on making sure their kids know how to do a variety of things that you might call survival skills, such that if, they can't rely on a computer, they can't rely on a car, they'll still be okay. They won't be undone.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, the people who do that, I'm very hopeful for. I think they'll be just fine, as they were just fine in every horrible event of humankind. People have survived throughout much worse things than we can imagine. But in terms of the whole, no. I think that what we're going to see is the United States in particular, or even the Western world, that becomes fairly dystopian, in the sense that we start to resemble a cross between China and or the Middle East or third world countries, depending on how much of those third world countries the West has allowed to just overrun their borders and come in and take over. So I don't have a lot of hope for Europe. I hope I'm already long gone before it happens, but I think that Europe is in very deep trouble. I think that the United States is in very deep trouble. Not so much for the immigration thing, although everybody rails about that. I think our bigger problem is economic. I think we are built on quicksand, and it's a long time coming. I wait for the day where I wake up and they're going to say it's all collapse. It's all
As
pay.
soon as they get rid of the dollar as the world reserve, that's it for you.
It's it will collapse. And so I'm so convinced of that happening sooner than later, that I've started doing things that friends and family think are insane. And I wouldn't say I'm spending like a drunken sailor, but I've encouraged my husband. He got his most recent bonus, and I said, we need to go on a trip. We need to travel. We need to do some things. And he's like, wow, we need to save for it. I'm like, don't save it. You go have experiences while we're still spry and able to do it, while we still physically, not only with our own health, but while they allow us to travel. Why buying an airplane ticket doesn't cost a kidney. like, I mean, or that it's even possible, because I genuinely think the day is coming where we will look back and say, oh, I should have done XYZ, whatever, because the rainy day I can't do even the money I save for the rainy day is just going to feed me. And that's about it. So I've
Not to
gotten,
mention that with your ideas, the money which is going to be programmable, I don't think you will be able to use it so often.
oh no, I'll be lucky. I'll be lucky to survive as long as my longest, my longest living relative lived to 93. I'm never going to make it to that. But, my mother died at 71. I'm turning 59 in a couple weeks. And
What?
yeah.
Unbelievable.
So, I am not living for, some time 20 years from now. I'm living my life.
Perfect.
And because I don't anticipate I'll be even as happy and as comfortable in 20 years if I'm still here as I am now. And I told him, I said, I'm having experiences. I might be living in a little corner of one of my kids, apartments in, in a little tiny box where they can, like a playpen, so that I don't run away with my senility or whatever. I said, but I'll have some beautiful photo albums to look at from my travels and to console me in my golden years. I'm not, I'm not gonna play that game. That people will
Mhm.
say like, "Oh, I'm saving for retirement. I'm saving for retirement." I'm not retiring. I'm gonna be lucky if I don't work. I can't get a job now. Every bit of work I have is because somebody decided they wanted me to teach their kids something, and it isn't much. They're using AI already. They don't, on the one hand, I say they don't see the value of a human tutor. On the other hand, I got a phone call out of the blue yesterday. Um, and I answered the phone, and this girl's voice, she says, "Miss Fillman?" I said, "Yes." She said, "This is Anisha, your student?" And I said, "Yes, of course I know you. How are you?" Whatever. I just finished her college pack back in November. I worked with her on her
Mhm.
college essays. And she said, "I had to call you right away." She said, "I got my acceptance letter from Stanford today."
Wow.
And she said, "Every essay that you helped me with, every bit of all my applications that you helped me with, I got into all those schools. But my dream school was Stanford, and you helped me the most with that packet, and I got in today."
That's beautiful.
And it was like, this is why I wake up in the morning. Like that, if I could, that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to just tutor and teach. And I worked with another teacher, my friend Michael Malione. He's out in California. He's a math teacher who just tutors privately. That's all he does, because he's so disgusted with the math instruction out there. And we set up something. It's called Cogito Learning Center.
Mhm.
And really what it is it's just a way that we can offer private courses like novel studies, or a course in logic, a course in vocabulary development, things like that, to parents who feel like this is not getting done in the school. And also to offer private tutoring hourly, and essay coaching and all that kind of stuff. And most of it's me. I mean, I built the website, but he and one other person will be offering math as well. And I've set it up, but I'm terrible at marketing. So I'm trying to figure out how to, I've actually even gone out on social media and offered to barter with a parent who's good at marketing. Is it like, if you
Mhm.
help with this marketing, I'll tutor your kids for free, like we'll
Yeah.
trade. Because all I want to do anymore is reach individual children. If I can, one child at a time, if I can get them, I have a student I see every Saturday. His parents are Indian immigrants, and his Anisha's younger brother, in fact.
Mhm.
And I probably shouldn't have said their name on a public thing. My bad. But anyway, I they came to me for writing, and this kid is so smart. I mean, both of them are so incredibly bright. But what I notice is, even with the very bright students, school has miseducated them to the point where they can't communicate their brilliant thoughts to other people. So I'll give you an example. He has a tendency in his right. We're reading a book by Aruta Sepetys. I don't know if you've ever read it, called Beyond Shades of Gray. And it's about a
Mhm.
Lithuanian family that's deported by the Soviets.
Mhm.
And he had his main idea of what he wanted to write about was brilliant, but he would struggle to get the first sentence. We finally get the first sentence of what he wanted to say. And then I noticed all of his sentences were along the lines of, this character had this thing this character showed this quality, that very much using nouns. Used a lot of nouns, not a lot of verbs. So that the writing in the end, when you read it, is kind of flat. You don't get the movie in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Sense of, she reacted, she responded, she did XYZ, which then you're there, right? But when someone says so-and-so had a thing, so-and-so saw a thing, whatever, it's very flat. And I've been trying to work with him, and I realized this is how he was taught. And he showed me some of the things that they use for their writing, and it's almost as though they don't want the children to be able to communicate in a compelling or clear way in writing. It's really frightening. And what does that do then? That pushes them to use ChatGPT and other forms of large language AI, because they really can't express themselves very well. But the tragedy is they don't know how to even put a prompt in. They don't know how to write a prompt. If you can't write, you can't prompt properly. So it's gonna be sad. But I just don't have enough students. I need more students whose parents are saying, yeah, what you're getting in school is not good enough. You need to go to somebody who's going to poke and poke and poke and ask questions. I even said to him, I said, I'm sorry to push on you so much about this sentence. He said, no, I'm glad you're doing it, because nobody does this for me. So,
Actually, it's very interesting. I think it's part of the design that rhetoric and the ability to write will be very limited, because you're very dangerous if you can spread ideas, right? So just
bingo. And so, like I said, I know I don't know how dangerous I am because nobody's listening to me.
You are very.
Thankfully, it hasn't come to that where people think I'm too dangerous. I was pretty much drummed out of all the anti-woke circles, though, because I didn't toe the school choice line. So I could have been a little rising in my trajectory, and then they found out I wasn't in support of their little boondoggle, and it was like, I became persona non grata overnight. So
for now, maybe I can help a little bit, although I don't know what will be, the scale of that, but maybe you can tell us about the webpage and how to find you and how to hire your incredible abilities as a teacher.
Well, I can give you the link. It's just Cogito or Cogito, whichever way you want to pronounce it. I think both are sort of correct, so I've been told. But I'll drop the link over here. And it's a little bit of a work in progress. Like I said, I'm not a web designer, so the mobile site has some things I've got to work on. But that's how you can do it. There's some summer courses that I have going. I have to put them into I think I put them in the calendar for the dates. It's ironic because I think with the time difference, it might be possible actually for people in Israel to hire me, because I don't have another job during the day. In other words, a lot of teachers or tutors only tutor at night, which of course wouldn't be possible. But I, of course, am available all day in Eastern time. And so people who have evening and, their kids go to school or their kids are busy during the day and they just have an hour after dinner or something, it could work out perfectly, right? Because then it's my daytime hours. And I would love that, as long as they don't mind it being in English, because I don't speak Hebrew. But yeah, I mean,
I remind the parents we are talking about 7 hours difference. So
it's 7 hours different. So, but if they were interested in reading literature in English, or if they're interested in writing in English or things of that nature, or they're applying to American colleges, which I don't know why they would be doing that, but okay. I'm very down on it. Even my student, I've congratulated her. I'm proud of her. She really, truly deserves to be at a school of that alleged caliber, but I do say alleged. But I wouldn't send, even my daughter who's in college right now, she's just going to our local state university. I think it's honestly been a waste of her time and money. So even she thinks so. She agrees. Luckily, there's been no activism issues with her, but she just hasn't. She said, "I'm just getting a piece of paper, Mom." What a tragedy.
Yes, absolutely. And would you like to speak a little about the Substack? Substack?
Oh, sure. So I also have a Substack. The reason we learned at Substack.com. Full confession, I don't post there as often as I should. I get a lot of flack for that. People are saying, I'm not going to subscribe or, certainly not contribute to your efforts if you don't publish more often. I think, would you really read it if I wrote something every week? So I publish sporadically, but you can rest assured that when I do publish, I've put my all into it. The most recent piece I did was, dear schools, stop blaming parents, because that's a trendy thing to do now is, oh, the parents, it's the parents' fault. It's parents' fault. So y'all, you're going to get blamed anyway. You might as well be in charge of your kids' education. But I put a lot of time and effort into that to defend parents, because I'm tired of us getting blamed. And that's even as a former teacher. And so when I put something out there, it's usually because I've given it a lot of thought, and I don't just publish to publish.
Yes.
But it does, if for those people who do support through the paid membership, it absolutely does support my existence, in the sense that even though you're not paying for the content, like, and I don't publish that often, the fact that I have the software, that I have all the things to do the research, the time to do it, et cetera, is a function of people actually hiring me, or donating, because otherwise I wouldn't. I mean, I've periodically looked at waitressing jobs, put it that way. That's how nearly impossible it is to get a job for me. All the jobs in education that I see now, let's say on LinkedIn, for somebody of my sort of age and experience, are in sales. They want us to sell the AI, sell the ed tech. They're not looking for human beings to do teaching or even learning design. It's either train the AI, sell the AI, or come work in a public school, which I won't do.
I understand.
So there it is. Not to cry poor or anything. I'm just saying we're rapidly moving away from human teachers. That's scary.
Yes. Deb, you're incredible. I'm very thankful for your time. It's absolutely a delight. And I hope that the Israeli, how do you call it, the parents will be smart enough to actually contact you and use your help.
If they do, or even if anybody's watching you, someplace from the East Coast, I know there are a fair number of people who live in the New York area and so on. I'm in North Carolina, but it doesn't matter. And we do offer with the Learning Center, there's a 30-minute free consultation that people can sign up for to talk with me privately about their child and about what their concerns are. And I think you know me well enough to know that I am honest to a fault. So if I can't help somebody, I will tell them I can't help. Like, this sounds like you have a situation that is beyond my capabilities. So to give you an example, I don't teach special needs. Like, I don't know how to teach people with dyslexia. And I'll admit that freely. I do have a lot of experience with students who have ADHD and working with them on their executive function and study skills and things like that. My own eldest child has ADHD, so I've had to deal with that. But it's a little different in the online environment. I'm not saying I can't. I'm just saying we'd have to have realistic expectations, and it requires really close partnership with the parent on their end to back me up, because there's only so much you can do through a screen, right? If I were physically in the room, big difference. But when it's online, there are different limitations. But if your child is just demotivated, bored, frustrated, and willing, that's key. If they're bored at school, but they'd like to not be bored, I can help. If they're bored and they don't want to not be bored, if they're perfectly content being bored, nobody can get through. You probably experienced that yourself. It's talking to a wall.
Yes. So. And what is the age range that you can help?
I can help kids all the way down to 3rd grade, but my specialty is probably middle school and above. 6th through 12th are most of my students. And that's, but I have worked with kids as young as 6 and 7, and, they're shorter sessions, usually like 30 minutes. They don't sit for an hour when they're that small. And we do things like trade-off read aloud, like I read, they read, we talk about what we read. And when we do writing with kids that young, it's usually oral summaries, but they get practice with their sort of public speaking and vocabulary. And we get to working, by 4th and 5th grade, we start actually putting things on paper with, writing more than a paragraph at a time. Things we read would be like Aesop's fables and things of that nature. But I love working with the little kids because they are fresh and eager, and there's so much you can do to help them. But my specialty seems to be with those middle school kids who really now need to read to learn. They're not learning to read.
Mm-hmm.
And someone did not prepare them with the reading comprehension and vocabulary enough to do that. And if they don't get help quickly, they could wind up in high school very far behind. And that's when they cheat. That's when they cheat. You almost can't blame them. I've had students who are in 9th grade who maybe read at a 5th grade level, if they're lucky.
It's terrible.
How would you not cheat? Like, I mean, they're so anxious. They can't figure out what to do without cheating. Their parents have no idea.
I understand.
Yeah.
Deb, thank you very much, really,
You're
from
so
the bottom
welcome.
of my heart. So, with your permission, I will stop the recording and.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.